Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It's January 15th, 2025, and today we are continuing our series on Mormon stories about Mormons in the military. We are super excited to have with us in studio Austin Wheeler. Hey, Austin.
Hey, how you doing, John?
So glad you could join us. Austin served full-time in the military for about 6.5 years, including attending West Point. He was in the Army. He also wants to share his perspective on, Christianity, Mormonism, military service, issues like violence, but also, Christian nationalism. And I assume kind of the Desnat culture, but also just, modern themes around aggression and violence and that sort of thing. And there's also many traditional themes around faith and, Mormon church culture, etc. So you're in for a real treat today. There's also, just as a trigger warning, there's also some themes of abuse in this story. And it's going to be a great episode. I've got Margie here with me in studio. Hey, Margie.
Hi there.
And we're ready to roll. So, Austin, did I forget anything in the intro in terms of major themes?
No. That's anything to clarify. I'm sure I'll do as I'm talking through the story.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We were asking you right before kind of if there were any specific interviews on Mormon Stories podcast that made you interested in applying. And if I remember right, you mentioned specifically the Paul brothers. You kind of had some strong feelings around that interview, specifically when I asked them the question about Christian nationalism. And then you also mentioned growing up with Jesse Hildebrandt. And so that also was influential to you. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I would say from the military aspect of the Paul brothers interview, I know that there were some things that it gave me the opportunity to introspect that they said that I think a lot of people might have been concerned by or surprised by. And it really highlighted to me the need to address the civilian military divide and kind of help act as a cultural broker for kind of the experience of Mormonism as well as the military, the U.S. military. And then I grew up with Jess. So when all of the terrible events were coming out about just that entire episode of justice coming to light, it gave me a new level of compassion for them and actually gave some context for some of the stuff that I was experiencing as a 14 or 15-year-old that I didn't know what was going on. It just gave me that new level of compassion and love for them and hoping them the best. So.
And I think you mentioned another theme of like Mormons out of Utah basically sending, quote, troubled teens to Utah to be fixed or healed. Is that also a theme?
Yeah, definitely. I'll work that into my memory of my experience on Earth so far. But that's definitely something I've witnessed as a theme that I think Jess unfortunately very succinctly illustrates that kind of that subculture or that solution that exists, in my experience, uniquely to Mormonism.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Austin Wheeler, where does your Mormon story begin?
So I guess it would begin with my grandmother. She was a convert. She lives in Pasadena. She converted when my grandfather was actually away on the draft. It was one of those things that while he was in training.
Is that Vietnam?
This would have been the Vietnam draft, correct. So my grandfather and her, they believe were in Fort Leonard, Missouri at the time when my grandmother took the discussions. And she was baptized a member. He was not. It was just my father at the time, I believe, when my grandmother was baptized. So from that side, my father's side of the family, his two younger brothers were essentially born into the covenant. My grandfather was a major holdout. He's in his mid 80s now. I think he was like 78 or 79 when he actually was baptized a member.
Oh, wow.
That was just a couple of years ago. That was actually during my deconstruction. So that was a little jarring to see.
How about that?
See that, but they, raised my uncles and my father, fully invested in the church, very active in the scouting program, and Southern California. And then my mother, she's an immigrant to the U.S. She moved here from Colombia with her family when she was 16, and she was still living at home, I think like 17 or 18, when they took the missionary discussions, again, here in Southern California. My parents met at the, I think it was the Pasadena City College Institute, and they had a brief courtship, or, I guess standard by Mormon standards in the late 80s. My mother was married when she was 19, so fairly young, especially by today's standards. And I have an older sister and an older brother. I'm the youngest of three. And where I come in, so born into the covenant, early 90s, and grew up in Southern California, Corona, the Corona Norco area, Riverside. So as a kid, it was a great place to grow up. It's one of those things where it was 45 minutes to the beach or 45 minutes to an hour up to ski slopes, in Big Bear or Wrightwood area. So my early childhood, I guess, like one of the earliest memories of just like church I had, it was always the church. It was
Meaning the only true
yes,
church.
Little trademark under that, the one true church. I was definitely raised Orthodox. I don't know how Orthodox Southern California Mormonism is compared to the corridor here, but it was one of those things where it was, every activity was attended. The Boy Scouts of America was completely ordained by God and the greatest thing ever created. And it was, stuff like the Scout motto was quoted virtually as scripture. So, I was very much in it, very much, I believed as an 8-year-old. I definitely knew I needed to be baptized. I remember by my 9th birthday, I felt bad that I had never read the Book of Mormon. So when I was 9, to make up for having not fully read it as a child, I reread it 9 times, one for every year in my life. And then kind of, I see now as a scrupulosity thing, but every year to make sure that I knew that I was renewing my faith and I was, really likening the scriptures unto myself. And I would reread the Book of Mormon every single time for my age. So I did that from age 9 up until age 25. So I've read, just a couple times. I've read cover to cover the Book of Mormon, all the footnotes, and I started doing that with the Bible in high school because I got really involved with the Christian crowd, non-denominational Christians. My parents got divorced when I was in 7th grade. I think that was a really important thing in my life because it was the first time I had like a major authority structure, a power structure, upended. And it gave me the first chance to actually see like my parents as human, but also see that humans are fallible and that, from a Christian standpoint, the need for grace, the need for forgiveness, and just the how to hold space for people just trying their best. Mm-hmm. And I'd say my devotion to my orthodoxy, or the orthodoxy in the church, outside of just being the default activity that you had to do, where I really got that idea that I had to build my testimony, was really came after would have been like 10 years old, I believe. I had attended a ward Christmas party where I was sexually assaulted by a fellow member of my ward, one of the people in the youth program with me. They were mirroring a sexual activity that they witnessed somebody in the bishopric having their son perform on them. And he was 11 at the time. So, and that was tough because I had been baptized. And, this would have been, pre-Prop 8. So the culture of Mormonism was still very much that gay people don't deserve, to live. But in my mind, I had done, I had done something homosexual. So that meant I was gay and I didn't deserve to, I was broken. So I really, I felt like I had done something wrong, and I couldn't talk to my parents about it.
So you were kind of alone with it. You were holding.
Yeah. I was just trying to make sense of it and it would be one of those things where I would be reading the Book of Mormon and I'd fall asleep, and I felt that I fell asleep because I was being unrighteous, and if I was feeling the Spirit, I would have been able to stay awake, and I was wrong for again, being a tired kid, rereading the same book he'd read 30 times before. But in that struggle, I, double, triple, quadrupled down on that. More, this church is true. This is all I've ever known. Like, my parents have told me, like, this is truth. Like, if anything happens, this is the one thing I can rely on. So, I just, again, at like 13 or 14, really just tried to throw myself into it harder and hoped that would in some way fix me. But
so your chronology, just so I'm making sure so you experienced abuse at age 10. Is that what you kind of around that age? And then your parents' divorce was when you were in 7th grade?
Yeah.
So pretty soon
close.
after.
Yeah. So like within a year of that happening, I think my parents' divorce was finalized.
Okay. And then, so in thinking about that time, do you feel that your identity, the identity that you were creating during that time, and your, let's just say, fastidiousness when it came to kind of religion, do you feel like the root was this identity and belief you created around your brokenness? Is that where it came from? Or do you feel like the fastidiousness, your kind of the level at which you read the scriptures, you wanted did that always exist? Does that make sense? Was it born in those sort of, or did it always exist kind of? Do you remember that kind of even before that?
Yeah, I would say it definitely existed beforehand. I'm pretty far onto the spectrum with ASD there, but yeah. So, but I will say, having somebody who defaults to very black and white thinking and being given Mormonism, it is a very damaging construct. It's one of those things where if I had an occupational therapist or somebody, help me work through, like, hey, like, there are grays. And even today, that's something that, I struggle with, like, trying to hold space for not binary, right or wrong. But Mormonism is very plain in its language about what's right and wrong. So the church I attended, which at the end of the day is really just the Church of One, right? Because the more I've talked to people about their own faith journey, I realized nobody is in like, the only thing that unifies, I think, their thing is like having a calling or paying tithing, but it's like everybody believes in a different Jesus or a different hierarchy of, the Mormon church, the brethren or what have you. But the God that I was reading about and believing in, like there was one right thing to do, and pretty much everything else that wasn't that was wrong, and it was objectively wrong, and it was just so in that regard, I didn't have the tools to view myself as a victim of abuse. But that really was kind of like the framework that I had, was like, well, I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have been at a ward party when I'm 9 or 10, sorry.
So a belief that you created during that time, and I think this is something that we see, right, with children when things happen to you and you have no one really to share it with and not a lot of resources, is a child survives the way they can. And oftentimes that is that they create narratives or beliefs about themselves. In that, and what I'm hearing you say is you created a belief in yourself as kind of, it was your fault, or here are the ways that you played a part in that, or where you shouldn't have been, or you were broken in this way. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think one of the things too that, so I'm sorry, jumping forward a little bit forward in time, but by the time I was 13 and 14, there was stuff like the LDS Tools app was coming out, the Gospel Library was becoming a thing. All of a sudden, there was access to like 70s, 80s, 90s general conference talks, and there's a lot of really messed up things in every decade of the church that has been taught over the pulpit. So I found myself a lot, like as just a teen in general, like grappling with trying to make sense of like, who I was, and you're very, very egocentric, right? So it doesn't make sense that the world can be unjust or unfair. Bad things can happen to people. It was, well, there is a conference talk that that I looked up, and it was saying that victims of sexual abuse had to acknowledge how they were complicit in that abuse. And again, as a 13-year-old, 14, 15-year-old, like grappling with feelings of unworthiness or, it's one of those things like I've never really felt like same-sex attraction, but the fact that I did, a homosexual action like that again, that binary, like, well, then I must be gay and I must be bad.
Interesting.
And then, again, with that 2007, I think, like Prop 8, like we spent months, there was no real like youth group activities. It was canvassing every Tuesday night for Mutual.
So for those who don't know what Prop 8 is, canvassing doing what?
Yeah, so Proposition 8 was the church getting involved in political activity in California. There was a proposition to amend the California Constitution to add it was one line, but that's all it took to marginalize whole community, that marriage was only between a man and a woman.
And same-sex marriage was legal before Proposition 8. So that would have and actually did result in taking away the right to marry for gay people in California, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, on the tail end now, like I've learned about the amount of money that was dumped into it, and just my own experience. Like I said, like I remember feeling weird that, again, I'm 13 or 14 maybe, feeling weird that people didn't like that we were just trying to protect marriage. And I remember the narrative being like, well, if the very specific boogeyman of the evil lesbian or gay couple was going to,
in quotation marks.
Yeah. Sorry, in quotation. this invisible specter of if Prop 8 isn't passed and marriage isn't protected, then a gay couple could go and try to get a temple recommend to get married in the temple, to get sealed in the temple. But we know the temple's super secret, super sacred, so we can't allow that. But because there's no law, then this gay couple will actually sue the church. And suing the church is just the biggest, most terrible thing that could ever happen to this organization, all because they're trying to uphold God's will. So that's why we have to, add this line to the Constitution, to the state constitution, to make sure that, we protect the sacred covenants of the temple.
Yeah.
And that was honestly like the framework we got before we got told, now go pester your non-Mormon neighbors and ask them if they dislike gay people.
And we know the church spent over $40 million, influencing the legislative process of a sovereign U.S. state.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Successfully.
Yeah. Successfully. Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So
that's a lot of conflict for a little kid.
Yeah. So that was what a time to be alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. I will say another thing that really shaped, ultimately, I guess, why I got here during that time, again, just like pouring myself into not only the doctrine of the church, like reading McConkie when I was 12. Like, it's not a healthy kid doing that.
Right.
Not healthy for an adult to do that. But like that's where I was. But then the other thing was like, again, like culturally, right? So a big part of the culture, and I don't know if it's unique to where I grew up, or if it was like all of Utah, all of the country, the world, but there was very much this, kind of like the seed of Christian nationalism, right? Like just this idea that's very plainly in the Book of Mormon, like that, the primacy of America being instituted by God. So then the inference that because it was made by God, so long as they're righteous as a qualifier, like they're always in the right and there's a superiority there. Mm-hmm. So, there was again, the Boy Scouts was massive. It was one of those things where like I wasn't allowed to drive until I got my Eagle Scout.
Oh, wow.
So it was very much like, every month we'd have the overnight camping trip and set for like road show or, a dance festival or, LARPing in, sorry, for the Pioneer Trek. It was all just, scouts. And a big part of that too became like, I would say like paramilitary stuff. So the local leadership, when I remember when I was baptized, he came to my baptism, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever because he was a counselor in the stake presidency. But he ended up being my stake president, like immediately after that. So, he was kind of dynastic in that sense. But the stake president at the time, like during my entire youth, essentially, he was retired Special Forces, and a lot of like the stake firesides and stuff, or as eventually like when I started getting more interested in the military, he kind of noticed that. So I started being fed these stories, and it was one of those things where it's like I remember a like 200 youth stake fireside where he's talking about how like he said a prayer when he was doing airborne training and he was okay, but like the one non-believer like ended up drifting into like traffic and actually like died. And I remember like that being like what's the takeaway here? Or like hearing the stories of like kind of glorification of the violence, a lot of stories about how like, how heavily decorated he was, but also like the special forces unit he was with was in areas where like they weren't, like legally they didn't exist there, if that makes sense. So, like he should have been a Medal of Honor recipient, but
I see.
But they weren't officially there. So instead he just, like again, like at the priesthood session when you're hearing about how North Koreans surrounded them and they had to do hand-to-hand combat, and he watched the lieutenant on the team get killed with the hatchet. And so like that response, Margie, like I think that's a lot of people, but when to kind of milk before meat, right? Like when you're drip fed aggression or violence, you become numb to it, and so when you're being exposed to this type of stuff when you're 12, 13, and when it's framed that this is a righteous man, and I will say, like, I have no reason to believe that he was dishonorable in his service. I believe every one of those stories we heard. I feel compassion for him that he had to not only endure such violence but to exercise it. And I think like his military experience, combined with, I think, just the common themes in the Book of Mormon.
Because the Book of Mormon, those who haven't read the Book of Mormon, like half our audience has never been Mormon.
Right.
It's a super violent book, and it's a super militaristic book.
Yes.
Because like the second half of the Book of Mormon is almost all like armies, battles, battalions, legions, killing and slaughtering each other, and not just like tens, but like
6 million. We ran against each other. Now we're down to 3 million. Let's do it again. Now we're down to 1 million. Now we're down to 30.
Millions of deaths, military deaths with swords and shields, and stuff that now it's pretty clear those battles didn't happen, and because there were no swords and shields and chariots and helmets and horses, but it's like Joseph Smith was looking around, seeing all the frontier militaristic stuff, and he injected that into ancient American history, and but literally generals and armies, right?
Right. Yeah. So, and that's the thing too, like. I know from a philosophical framework, right? Like we talk about, that's like some people will take like pacts of nonviolence or something, right? Like they believe that, any form of consumption is unethical, or whereas like Mormonism, like it's codified in, I don't know. I know they changed like the intro and stuff recently, but back in my day, like this was right. This was proof that Native Americans were direct descendants of the people here the
Israelites.
That's right. Yeah. The 600 BC. A man who was concurrent with the prophet Jeremiah left, and part of his, and one of the first major plot points of the Book of Mormon is beheading a political figure. So, and I think too, like, again, we'll get that, I feel, towards the end of this conversation, but like Mormonism primes you to view violence as an acceptable tool or negotiation tactic, I guess, and you don't see it as violence, you see it as just a thing to be done.
Right.
So like again, culturally, you have the Book of Mormon saying cutting off people's heads is cool, chopping off their arms is tight.
And that's referring to the story of Ammon in the Book of Mormon, if y'all want to look that up. A prophet of God who ventures into Lamanite territory as a foreigner, and when he's attacked, he chops off a ton of guys' arms to the point that they're having to pile up the arms into a pile, right?
Right.
And he's a prophet, he's glorified, and that God gave him the power to chop off the arms of all these Lamanites. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, it's a very violent book.
Yeah.
And it's not only like, oh, here is a tactic that might be needed, but it's like glorified.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, like again, growing up, like it wasn't a direct thing on, the timeline of me being raised, but right, Columbine happened in 99. I was 6-7 years old. So the false flag was, well, video games are making our kids violent, and I remember, like having kids in the ward that they, weren't allowed to play anything over like a T-rated game. And, it's like, if you're aware of like the popular games for like kids growing up, Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, you had GoldenEye, which is you're literally just shooting each other. So like that's bad, right?
Is that James Bond?
Yeah, James Bond.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Honestly, like one of like the best like Nintendo 64 games ever. The audio on that, the soundtrack, it's a good one. But yeah, so it's, or like Grand Theft Auto. Like you're glorifying violence, but it's like
All the first-person shooters.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like so there's this outrage about that. But again,
But then read the Book of Mormon.
But then you got to have multiple 1 hour long lessons about how it was righteous to behead somebody who is who's passed out, or like, never mind like combat like ethics, like it's not an honorable way, but anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, stuff like that. So it's like that
Interesting.
that
That
false
is
outrage
interesting.
that they're talking about how bad it is. Now let's go to the war chapters in Alma.
Right.
You guys spend too much time killing each other. Let's talk about how the people we know definitely believe we're real and did this for God. We're doing this.
Yeah.
So.
And not to mention the Old Testament,
Right,
which is super violent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and weird. There's,
But as a kid, as a Mormon teen, young child / young teen, you're saying you absorbed that.
Oh yeah, yeah, and again, it was one of those things where it's like you might. I know there are definitely times where I felt that dissonance. Like I felt like this isn't safe or this doesn't seem right. But then I internalized that as I'm broken, or like I need to double my effort. Like if the siren's going off, this is unsafe or this is problematic. It's it's me to blame, like in internalizing the defect there.
So in high school, if you were going to kind of describe yourself as you went through high school, how would you describe yourself in high school? Interests, how you spent your time?
How did all this shape
Yeah.
your high
who
school?
you are?
So I mean, I think a big part of like my socialization and like my identity was like wanting, if I had enough people that liked me or looked up to me, then maybe that would fix how I felt about myself in private. So I was extremely extroverted. I was, my grades were always good enough. But yeah, so I was involved in a lot of stuff, like multiple varsity sports. I was really involved with the choir, kind of as an effort to help my older brother, who really openly struggled with Mormonism. It was one of those things where I spoke with him a few days ago, talking about this. When he was 8, he actually didn't want to get baptized. And he told my parents that it didn't feel right to him. He didn't want to do it. And, we just kind of reflected on that coercion, that the 8-year-old had. And there was like, well, your grandparents will be disappointed, like the bishop will be really disappointed. So, so that continued with my brother, who's like 2 years older than me. So like everything that I experienced, he was right there with me. But when he got to like junior high school, he started having real trouble with authority, acting out a lot. And he had a really strained relationship with my father. And I saw, again, in my mind, like I saw the disconnect that they had was because my brother wasn't trying his hardest to be Mormon. So that was another layer of like, well, my dad will love me more if if I'm the teachers quorum president or if I'm the deacons quorum president. Mm-hmm. But with my brother, that wasn't the case. So he got into, or we had like a friend of the family that told him, hey, like you need to be in this choir program, because the choir director was a very religious guy, like just super Christian. Like he'd open up like Monday, like at least once a week, like there'd be like a prayer in class, and like every trip there, or like every musical, like they'd have a big old prayer circle before Hello Dolly or before Little Shop of Horrors. Everybody prayed for glory to God and not forget their lines. So, it wasn't Mormonism, but there was at high school, there was like for high school, 400 kids. There were maybe 30 of us. So it's like, you knew everybody in the stake, you knew everybody in the ward. You knew everybody in the community who was Mormon and who wasn't. So, for my dad to have like what he saw as the closest analog to Mormonism, he thought that would really help my brother. So, my brother was in the choir, trying to keep him out of trouble. And then I joined the choir.
Just because it's in your outline, you mentioned, sort of like 4th of July activities at church where they would do sort of patriotic pancake breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
That's very Mormon. You mentioned references to the Mormon battalion a lot as part of your Mormon upbringing, which was a militaristic aspect to early Mormon culture. And then you mentioned a lot of law enforcement officers, in your warden stake.
Yeah. So I'll try to touch chronologically what you listed off. Thanks for that. So it's one of those things, like literally every year. And then again, kind of double down. And I see my dad probably once my parents got divorced, I think he really threw himself into Mormonism, trying to be an example of like, we can get through this if we have this. And I will say too, like my mom was present, like they co-parented very well after their divorce. They, like in my mind, it was kind of like a weirdly like amicable like divorce, like they like still like they're friendly enough towards each other. Like, I'm grateful in that regard. But again, like my dad was really like, this again, like this is the church, like this, like, I lost my marriage, but like this is what I can do to fix my life. And it was all faith for him. I have no doubt in my mind how unyielding that belief and faith was, that if he had Monday family evening, if he paid his tithing, if he paid his extra fast offering, if he had us do fast offering with the elderly women in the retirement home, if we went to seminary and we're on the stake president's seminary council doing an extra 3 meetings a month, like all this stuff, he felt that like if we did that, then life would be okay.
Yeah. So he kind of, it feels like, really doubled down, and the church kind of was the answer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then just to refer back, so what I'm kind of hearing, especially with what John kind of just mentioned in your outline. So it wasn't just that you had, was it the stake president that was in shared a lot of the military stories, right. But what I'm hearing is actually your ward as well.
Right.
That culture, that ward culture,
definitely
also had either members that were in law enforcement, but there was actually a military influence there as well.
Yeah, so I will say outside of the Mormon community where I lived, Corona, Norco area, Norco is North Corona, Horsetown, USA. Like they don't have sidewalks, they have horse trails. Like they love their Western culture. So as that, they are very, very Republican, very openly, a lot of Rush Limbaugh quoted on fast and testimony meetings growing up. But with that, just the culture of Norco in general was very much like support the troops, like the banners up for everybody who had ever joined, big old memorial park, like the local, politicians would come to like our pancake breakfasts and tell us, talk to us about how great, again, like how great America was, like how unique the experiment of democracy has been in our republic, which a lot of stuff I do like still agree with, but then there was like that extra, like, once the city council member left, it was like, yeah, but we know actually, or like every camp out there was around the campfire was talking about the importance of America and sometimes like talk about the enemies of America and how people sleep peacefully at night because like strong men or whatever are willing to do violence on their behalf. I butchered it, but it's one of those things. It's like you'd hear a lot of
quotes like that.
A lot of quotes about, like the need for violence and how like having a capacity to violence was like what made you special. And again, when you have Nephi was okay with killing somebody, he doubted a little, but he still did it. So it's like, if a prophet of God can do this, maybe if I have violence inside of me, that means that I'm called to something, or God is trusting me with something that not everybody else is trusted with. But yeah, and then with so Norco again had a lot of like CHP officers. There was a few FBI agents. One of those things, like brother so and so.
CHP is California Highway Patrol, right?
Yeah. So LA County sheriffs. There's one gentleman who was an ex-CIA agent who everybody, the open secret was he had to get interviewed by the lore was he had to get interviewed by one of the 12 because he had killed so many people in the CIA. They weren't sure if he'd be allowed to be baptized, but he was baptized. So I guess he killed only bad people. Or, like the FBI agent that had a fanny pack and everybody knew that there was a gun in his fanny pack at church. And, if anything bad happened, he'd go out guns a-blazing. And that was very much like the culture I was raised around,
Your outline also mentions, and I think this is an important thing to not leave out, is that Joseph Smith enshrined in the Doctrine and Covenants the teaching that the United States Constitution was inspired by God. And my memory growing up in a similar culture is that it wouldn't be wrong to say that the Constitution is actually part of the canon of the Mormon scriptural canon. That if someone were to say, yeah, it's Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, and the U.S. Constitution, there's plenty of Mormons that would not bat an eye at the U.S. Constitution being included in the scriptural canon, because this is God's one true country, and the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and Mormon culture today kind of all affirm that.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't want to impose that on your story.
No. I'd say, and I think that was really illustrated and I don't know how many people have thought about it or picked up on it, but one of the Paul brothers talked about when they swore an oath. They didn't say they swore an oath to the Constitution. They swore a covenant, right? And that's one of those things where it's like, that's not a word that exists in any of the legal stuff for the military. Like, that is a uniquely Mormon word, or I guess lawyers will say it, but like that sentence really meant something when the way he said, like, they swore a covenant to protect the Constitution. Like, there is, again, with like with the view of like the primacy of America and this being the promised land, they kind of get into broader topics of, American exceptionalism or, Christian nationality, just this idea that like God has ordained this document. So if it's ordained by God, how do you view it in any other way other than canonical or scripture?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Really quickly, you mentioned prepper culture associated with this militaristic, patriotic, nationalistic culture. Do you want to just give us a flavor for that? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I feel a hard time having a succinct point of conversation because, like, there's just maybe that's just like the nature of Mormonism. Is there's so much going on. It's kind of hard to keep track of like all of the things that make normal people like raise their eyebrows or kind of do a double take. Yeah, I grew up, especially my youth. It was Hinckley. Prophet Gordon B. Hinckley. And it was all about food storage, like the millennium was coming, it was imminent, there were going to be whispers that you were alive when Hinckley was, there were going to be type of little, cultural things like that. That you'll be alive when Jesus comes back. Right. Yeah. Like that the end is so nigh, you got to have 2 years. So that's another thing too, again, with like the prevalency of Mormonism in my life. Like, it wasn't uncommon to go to the bishop's storehouse and to spend a whole Saturday canning gallons of creamed corn and, Jell-O or, like loose oats being vacuum sealed and stuff, or like the sign up for the 55-gallon water drum going around in Elders Quorum and I got a couple of those.
Yeah, we had a few in our garage. Yeah,
we sure did.
So and that's like a whole different layer of, and honestly, I think one of the things that like scared me to a degree into the military was like, the Bible does not paint the return of Jesus as this fun experience.
Right.
No.
No one, yeah.
I remember my kids coming home from that lesson, like in primary, like terrified.
They were like, we don't want Jesus to come.
Jesus, please don't come.
It's terrifying.
It's like hail and fire and murder and death and destruction and earthquakes. Yeah.
So in high school, would you say you had already set your sights on, like, did you know you wanted to go into the military in high school?
Yeah. So my uncle, on my mother's side, he was in the Army. He was enlisted for a few years, and then he went to West Point. So it was one of those things, like I used to send him like Christmas letters calling him G.I. Joe and stuff and telling him he was a hero and he's doing the right thing. And he graduated, in 2003, so it was one of those things like I remember 9/11 happened and there was a lot of speculation that like West Point might have been an additional target for those suicide bombings. But that was, so that was my experience. It wasn't just like, you see the guy getting a free grand slam once a year and you say, thank you.
At Denny's, are you saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was my uncle, right? Like It was real.
So at this point in your timeline, it feels like you are very conditioned in Mormonism.
Yes.
And there's a cross section. You're also very conditioned for military service.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I think the other thing too, Margaret, I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, there was a period of time where I had, like, my local congregation knew that I was going to the military, and about half of them were like, "Oh, that's great. You're serving. You're doing what people need to do, like
duty."
Yeah, right, duty. And then the other side of it was like, well, you really need to go on a mission. You're only 17 and you're signing up for the Army. Like, you're gonna lose your faith.
So kind of like you're not actually doing the most important thing.
Right. Yeah, and it's one of those things. Like I love my old man, but there's one thing that's always bothered me. So I need to get this out there. He always said, and he was consistent, and he'll say, "I always said you got to do your duty to God, then country." And I'm like, okay, that's great, but Dad, it's the Boy Scout slogan, like it's not doctrine anywhere, like. But yeah, absolutely conditioned again, like, because the military wasn't just this thing that people had to do or stuff in movies. Like it was a calling, right? Like it was something that you were potentially preordained to do, right? But it's one of those things where it's like I had the conversation with my uncle, and he was one of those things like, hey, like I know you enlisted, like have you looked at West Point? And yeah, so for those that don't know, like West Point is the United States Military Academy at West Point.
What state?
That is in upstate New York. So it's about 50 miles north of Manhattan, right there on the Hudson River. Some historical context, it is the longest continuously garrisoned Army post in the history of America. It has been running since 1802. And yeah, it's especially for somebody who I wasn't poor by any means, but like I'd say lower middle, middle class. I didn't have any like college savings or anything. Well, that's not true. I did have a like great aunt who was a nun who made a trust fund for all of my grandpa's grandkids. So there was some money, but I didn't see myself wanting to use it. I thought, like, I'm just going to join the military, do my thing, do it for a few years. My thought was I'll do it for 3 years, get a couple deployments, go on a mission, and then go back.
Okay.
But the conversation was like, if you want to do the military thing, you should really look at West Point because it's a free education, and you'll commission as an officer, which is like not just like do something till you break your body, but it's like it could be like a full career.
Yeah.
And you're not just doing grunt work. Like you're gonna learn how to lead people, and that appealed to me. So I applied, but I actually I initially got rejected. But I got instead I got an offer to they have a prep school program, which is different from like some of like the Southern, like the Citadel or what's the one that our future president went to, like VMI or Norwich. It's not like those. It's actually like you're gonna become enlisted. Your job is going to be to prep to go to West Point for a year, and if you don't get in, then you'll have to sign some additional paperwork, and that's it. And thanks, or you go to 3 years of military service. So I was like, I don't know what that means. And my uncle's like, hey, like the prep school was developed to get, especially post 9/11, to get people who had combat experience, who hadn't been in school for a few years, to give them an opportunity to return. So it was for actual, like somewhat older soldiers who were still under that threshold of 25 to get into West Point. It also started really getting used as a redshirt year for college athletes, like football recruits. And then like I had a few like classmates at the prep school who were like, their dad was a colonel. They were cool dudes, but they were as dumb as rocks. So they needed a lot of tutoring to, get their SATs up to qualify to get into West Point.
I see.
But yeah, so I ended up, coming out of high school, did basic training with the prep school. And where it gets really unique is the year I went to the prep school was the first. It used to be at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, but they actually moved it to a corner of the campus. So I actually spent, as a cadet and cadet candidate, I spent 5 years, at West Point specifically in that role. So, I saw over a decade, before and after of cadets go through, and the military, the Mormon military families. I saw the branch become a stake.
I see.
But
how was it for you going from California, really thinking about the military, thinking about what it would be like to be part of the military, and actually then going to West Point, actually participating in basic training, your experience of it? How would you describe it? Was it what you thought? Was it harder than what you thought? Was it a good fit for you at that time?
And you said there was some you enlisted before West Point, right?
Yeah. So when I was still, it's it was a little dicey. So I graduated when I was 17. I have a late birthday. I actually forged my dad's signature to give me the age waiver to enlist. So because
your dad wasn't.
He didn't want me to go until I went on a mission.
So a little bit of a control thing going on there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think anybody. I think my uncle might have known. So I don't think anybody knew that like I had an active date. I had I had the recruit bonus ready to go. I was going to do, so this would have been like 2010, 2011. So there was like a $50,000 signing bonus. I was supposed to go to in my mind as a 17-year-old, I was going to try out for the Ranger Regiment. I was going to get in and show them how badass and high speed I was, and I was going to kick indoors with the cool guys. Realistically, what happens to like 97% of people is they go to airborne school. That's cool.
Which was where?
That would have been Fort.
Is that Fort Bragg?
Or Fort Moore now. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so airborne school, and then normally you go through Ranger selection. You wash out because like most 17-year-olds don't have the muscle mass or like the endurance to deal with that.
And this is what Marty Ross talked about in our interview with him.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. He did go through
did Ranger.
Yeah.
He was a Ranger.
So
for those of you who want to hear about that, Marty can
speak
to that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say realistically, like I said, like the burnout rate's high, but you still end up in an airborne unit because you went to an airborne. So that's Vincenzo, Italy with 173rd. That's 82nd Airborne, which is like a very, as far as like main army, that's like one of the more like high speed, like they were doing a lot of, they had really high deployment tempo, and they technically were the only airborne unit to do an airborne drop since World War II. Like the 101st, technically it was airborne, but that's really, sorry. But so it was one of those things where it's like, I wasn't, I knew I wasn't going to become a cook, right? It was like, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. If I make it, I'm doing really cool stuff. If not, still in a pretty cool place. So that was kind of, it was like option 4, option 40. It was like the thing that like I guaranteed, you know, and I was supposed to report in like August of 2011. But instead I got this, you know, this offer to go to the prep school. And my uncle's like, dude, you got to take it. Like, you're in. He's like, if you show up, he's like, they want you to succeed so bad in this program. Like, they believe in you. You're just not quite there. And which again, like I had straight B's, but like I had, you know, so like my GPA was terrible, but like everything else, you know, like all the extracurriculars, like I looked like a good candidate. So he was just like, you got to take it. So they, you know, they cleared my additional, my contract, dropped my basic date. And then they did their own abbreviated basic training for cadet candidates, because again, like half of them were just coming straight out of high school, but the other half had already been through basic training. They had already been through AIT. I had a few guys in my class, great dudes, and females. They, you know, like they had a couple deployments already. You know, like I had one of my classmates, the following year, like he got his Purple Heart awarded to him in front of the entire Corps of Cadets, like all 4,000, you know, and from when he had gotten blown up like 3.5 years prior, when he was still, you know, sergeant, so-and-so. So yeah, so there was, you know, that abbreviated one, but, you know, I still like went through the gas chamber. I learned how to, you know, give somebody an IV and get an IV, had to ruck, you know, carry stupid weight. So it was one of those things like I was excited for, you know, like at the time, I think like part of like the subversion of military recruitment, there was like all those like Discovery channels showing like all the Hell Week stuff for like selection or you know, like what SEALs, you know, the SEAL selection or Ranger tryouts or Sapper School.
That's
so
right.
it was one of those like mainstream medias that were like I readily consumed, like, oh man, that's gonna be so cool. So and I like I was like I grew up camping, so it's like the field stuff was like that was, you know, that was the meat and potatoes. Like I was ready to go. Like that's what I wanted to do. Again, like I've been conditioned that like violence is necessary. I think I have the disposition where I could act violent and not have that destroy me. You know, like I could compartmentalize that in whatever way. Like I don't know how a 17-year-old me really thought like it would be okay.
I see.
So
Yeah.
So you went to that school?
yeah. So
And where was it again?
So it was on West Point. Yeah. So it was on base. It was away from the main academy, about like 1.5 miles, 2 miles.
But it was
maybe.
like a prep. It was a prep for the main academy.
Yeah. So the battalion. So it's a single battalion, which is 3 companies, and they had a total of like 300 cadet candidates. And the cadet candidate could be everybody from me, who like I literally had no connection to guys that were football recruits, and when they're, you know, NCAA football rules don't apply. Like, so, you know, trying to use that as a recruitment piece. Or like I had a buddy who, he got in, but he tore his ACL like 2 weeks before he was supposed to go to basic training. So he didn't like lose his eligibility or whatever, or like get lost in the sauce type of thing. They gave him an offer to the prep school. So he was ready to go to college, you know, so he was there, his ACL healed up, and then we all matriculated with the class of 2016.
Okay.
So.
Plus, it's near the birthplace of Joseph Smith and the founding of the Mormon Church.
yeah.
I'm sure that didn't escape you.
No, it did not. I actually, on 3 separate occasions for young adult activities for the West Point branch / ward, I was the one that had to rent out the 20 passenger vans from the motor pool, and I drove us up to the Finger Lakes. And
Wow.
yeah.
So I'm noticing just a parallel. If the church has a purpose for you and a use for you, and they create this identity to have that, their purpose for you and their use for you fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that with the military too? They're kind of training you up with a certain purpose and to use you.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the things too that, you know, I talked about earlier, was like that feeling of brokenness. Like the military gave me a framework that we don't care what you looked like coming into this. We're going to build you in our image.
Yes,
We're
we'll
going
remake
to
you.
make you what, you know, and it's so liberating to a point to basically be told, like, we are going to tell you your potential, and then we are going to expect you to meet that. So, like that was one of those things, you know, I was all in on Mormonism, and then, you know, especially like West Point, like, it's funny with Utah, right? Like my mom remarried somebody who lives in Utah, and like when they say West Point, they're like, oh, like Riverton area high school, like, and it's like, no, like one of the oldest institutions in America, you know, like just the historicity of it is lost, which again I think goes to the breakdown and relations between the civilian population, military population, but.
And just to really put a fine point on it, would it be accurate to say that your theological worldview, your sense of meaning and purpose in the world was that sort of like Christian God, Mormon God wanted you to become a killing machine? Like, is that simplistic?
I'd say in the time, I think that's how I reconciled it, or like how I saw it, right? Like it was one of those things where it was like, my dad has very traditional views of masculinity, you know. So when when I have these traditional, you know, heteronormative, you know, again, like the 6'7" prior special forces guy talking about, you know, in my mind, that's the archetype for masculinity. That's the archetype for, you know, manliness, and that's also from the Mormon standpoint, like that man, you know, with reverence, that man is a stake president. Like that is the archetype for a priesthood holder. Mm-hmm. Like, wow, what, like a spiritual giant, you know? So it's like, it was almost a way of trying to see, like, I don't, you know, so I'm broken, but if I make myself whole in this way, like maybe God can use me for that purpose, you know, like, with in the Book of Mormon, we talk about the oh man, I'm forgetting it. It's so cool. I'm forgetting these names.
You like that?
So with Ammon, right? Like he had was like 5 or 6 brothers all go out at the same time as him. Like, I don't know. I feel like there were a couple duds in the group we didn't hear too much about. You know, not everybody was killing or whatever, right? But they were still successful. You know, told that they were righteous and stuff. So like I kind of saw it as like I may not be one of these guys. Like I may, you know, again, like I may have been broken, so somebody whole doesn't have to get damaged by this aggression or by this violence. I think that's really
maybe it gives meaning to your imperfections, that you can become a killer, so that a more virtuous, you know, Nephi-like, which ironic because Nephi is the one who chops the head off, but like a more virtuous Peter priesthood holder Mormon boy can not have to be the killer, but I'm broken already. Yeah. So it may as well be me that does the killing.
So are you like offering yourself up in a way?
Yeah, I think that's honestly like the type of viewpoint I would have had. It's just kind of tangential. At one point, when I in my career, when I knew the post I was supposed to be going to, it was the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California. It's like the middle of the desert, nothing around. But everybody who's going to deploy goes there, and then there's like they play Army, and the opposition force, or Op 4, is they just pester, you know, the guys who are about to deploy. So you do a lot of time in the field. So I remember telling this one guy, and he was very sincere. He's like, dude, you're gonna be so lethal. He's like, oh, dude, I'm so jealous of you. Like, it's going to be such a good first command. And it was one of those things where it's like, in the context, I was like, yeah, I am going to be it. And then now it's like, I guess it's a really weird thing to like
take as a compliment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally tracking, like just yesterday, the new nominated Secretary of Defense was in front of, I think, the Senate for a Senate confirmation hearing.
Yeah.
And that word just kept coming up. He's like, we need to make the military more lethal, more lethal. I want to improve the lethality.
Yeah.
And in the one sense, that word's so jarring. in the other sense, that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like if you come at it from the framework of like violence is the universal language. It's like you very quickly get into like the quotes that are picked up by like alt-right people or like militia groups. You know, like you'd rather, you know, just like the love of the movie 300. You know, it's like, oh, we're not poets, we're soldiers. Like that's all we are. We're warriors. We're fighters. Like,
right.
Yeah,
that's the vibe I got from the Paul brothers, that they were romanticizing the violence, ennobling it, and that their Christianity / Mormonism informed the ennobling of sort of violence, which, again, every country needs to defend itself. So, like, I'm not even dissing that. I'm just trying to describe what I'm seeing and hearing.
Yeah.
That a religious worldview, a Christian worldview, a Mormon worldview can be a way to kind of smoothen or grease the wheels of the glorification of lethality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which isn't new. I mean, this is like so much of human history, right?
Yeah.
That religion becomes the tool in which we dehumanize and justify.
I'm sure we could find Sumerian text where murder's tight. You know, it's like,
Really quickly, I'm curious how your branch or ward culture at West Point was similar or different than your branch or ward or state culture back in Southern California in terms of all the patriotism stuff and nationalism stuff and military stuff.
I mean, it was expected, I guess, would be, you know, like we're, so a big thing was we didn't have our own meeting house. We met in the 3rd floor of Thayer Hall.
Oh.
So, you know, it's like where, you know, one of the rooms I had my stats class or, you know, where I had my Middle Eastern Studies class with my instructor who was missing a leg because it got blown off in Afghanistan. Like the sunbeams met there, you know? So there was that like just
family too.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So you had, you know, these colonels, majors and stuff, like very similar to Mormon culture. The military, for better or worse, really incentivizes the nuclear family unit. So you had a lot of people, especially from, you know, West Point, they get married within a week of graduation and they have they're pumping out kids, you know, within a year or two of that. So
some overlap.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it was frustrating being a young adult, given the narrative that I had to find a spouse and start having kids, that there wasn't really a singles ward. So the West Point experience was really, it was that microcosm because, so I guess, so on the one hand, I guess, so first things first is going back to my year at the prep school. I think it's like really important, kind of foundational, figuring out how the rest of it worked. I went with this chip on my shoulder that I wasn't going to lose my faith. That there was enough people at my home ward that said, "Oh, you're not going on a mission." I had to prove them wrong. That I had to prove that the military wasn't mutually exclusive to serving a mission or just the church in general.
So that was still on, like, in your mind that you were absolutely going to serve a mission too.
Yes. So, and that's one of those things where it was like kind of the softening with my dad. It was like, hey, Dad, there's Mormons that go to West Point and they go on a mission during West Point. And that program actually, so the way West Point works is you get your offer. You have to be nominated by a senator or a congressman, or like your parent has to be like a colonel or higher to get like a direct line kind of in. But somebody has to, nominate you and everything. You get in. The first 2 years you're at West Point, you don't owe anything to the American taxpayer, anything whatsoever. You can fail out. You can just say, I don't want to do this anymore. Leave, no questions asked. The first week of the academic year in your junior year, You have what's called so the junior class is called cows. It comes from an old term where like the first major break you got was during your junior year. So people would just wait outside the gates of West Point, and somebody like wrote about it, talking about it looked like the cows coming home. So the cow class, the juniors, you have what's called cow commitment. Which is you all get into an auditorium with, either your 1,000 classmates or your 900 that are still left. And you do an oath saying not only that you're going to finish West Point, but that you're going to owe the Army 5 years of active duty as an officer after that. And if you don't, you have to pay everything back. So if you get kicked out of West Point as a senior, you could owe $300,000 to $400,000 to the Army. So it's like a really big point. So back in, I believe it was the 70s was the first one it happened. Somebody realized that they could resign and then just reapply and go on a mission and then come back. So the second, I believe he was the second cadet to ever do it. He actually was a retired colonel, and he came back. He served his adult, married senior couple mission. They started, so that's another thing. They started when I was there. They started having military, like prior military service member couples, serving senior missions to be like liaison for the community, and it really became like liaison for the cadets. And it was like pretty effective kind of attrition, buffer to help keep the cadets involved. Like I spent a lot of weekends, like at the senior missionary, like hanging out with senior missionaries, and they were just like, like they had a washer and dryer that we can use that was better than like the military solution of like you send it back and hope you get your bag back type thing. So starting again, like I think he would have been in the 70s, and then since then, so by the time I had gotten there had been over 100 missionaries that, or like members that went to West Point for 2 years, resigned their sophomore, junior summer, left for 2 years, and then came back and then finished up West Point. But yeah, so that was definitely something I remember. Like, again, I wrote in my journal, like, it can be done. It will be done. I was like, it was a very faith affirming experience for me to see that, like, I can still do this. I can still be faithful. Like, they are doing this. They are being faithful.
Oh, shoot. Were you going to mention people getting sent away?
Oh, yeah.
It's okay to jump back.
Sorry. We'll go back to that. Okay. So my brother, my dad like tripled down on the church, and that really didn't work for my brother. So my parents divorced. My brother, halfway through his senior year of high school, actually got sent off to live with my grandparents, because like my dad just couldn't handle the challenge. And to both of them, like they needed third party help. Like, like my dad and I, like I think we have a really good relationship, and a lot of what I learned was kind of the placation to a degree of just like, hey, if I don't cause a problem, there won't be a problem. And if I do the church stuff, my dad is happy. So I'll just try to do that. But yeah, so like my brother got sent off. And it's one of those things where looking back now, it's so normalized for your cousin, so my brother got sent off. In our ward, we had a close family friend. She got sent off for 6 months to her family members, like in Central Valley. It was one of those weird things. She was kind of my sister's friend, but then she was gone for a year, so she had to like repeat a year of high school. So all of a sudden, she was like in my like high school group. Because my sister was like 4 years older than me, so like there was just enough. I was like, oh wow, this is weird. She's here now. Like, oh, okay, she's cool. But
I'm imagining you would get sent off for either having sex, getting pregnant, or getting involved in drugs and alcohol. I mean, those are the only things I could think of.
I mean, honestly, I think that's the narrative.
Well, yeah, that is the narrative. Yeah.
I think it's just parents sincerely struggling to navigate a troubled or a teen that doesn't fit the mold of Mormonism.
Totally.
Like I think about Jesse
Hildebrand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was no I was a boy. They were texting at one point in time, and our text consists of like, "Hey, what are you doing? Oh, that's cool. Oh, maybe we should hang out. Oh, okay, maybe not. Okay, hey, what you know?"
Yeah.
So like,
It was even in their interview, it was like asking questions.
yeah,
Them being genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Or noticing things in Mormonism that put up a red flag for their parents of like, wait, you're not in an obedience compliant mindset, therefore troubled, like danger, we need reinforcements now. It's almost like the normative teen brain of differentiation, individuation, and a bit of pushback, right? When you're trying to, or whatever. I think within Mormonism, contextually, it's like, that's a danger.
Yeah.
You're now a threat to our system, our family system, and what we're trying to create here. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and I think it really highlights how incompatible Mormonism is with reality when age appropriate mental, like growth is seen as a threat or, outgroups you.
Yeah.
Like when else is, if not as a teenager, when are you supposed to say, hey, is this really, when are you supposed to try on identities and stuff? Like that is a completely expected, normal, healthy thing to do. And yeah, it's, with Jess, it's like, I never, and I feel bad because I will say like culturally, like if a girl kissed a boy, it's like, oh, you knew, and she was a slut. Right? Like women were demeaned, they were devalued. My sister was brutalized, by like a handful of guys in the ward because like she kissed a guy, and it was, there's like this weird piety dichotomy with like, you're a boy, you're full of hormones and you want to make out or do other stupid stuff. But so, and that's the thing with like, specifically my experience with Jess, it's like, it's not like there was this unfair, like peer assertion that they were living in sin or doing terrible things. Like they were just being a kid really. And then they just vanished. And I didn't even know that the context of them vanishing, but it was just another drop in the bucket of parent doesn't understand why teenager is struggling with a high demand organization.
Yeah.
Like my sister-in-law, I found out that like my wife's family, like they moved to Utah for 2 years because she was being a problem child or whatever, but like she just got sent off. And it's one of those things that's like my buddy lived on my couch because his parents were just like, you're 18, you have 9 more months of high school, we just don't want to deal with you.
That's right.
And so it's just, so it's like, it's one of the things that always bothered me if like the families are forever type of thing. And it's like, I don't know if it's just like that, the parallax adjusted to infinity. Like if you view everything on the infinity timeline, no mess up you have right now will be so bad that they won't get over it in time and come back around. And I think that like perspective really hurts Mormons who need to have authentic familial connections and communications.
Right. That's right.
Okay. And so I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to cover that.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So, sorry. So I guess, so like pre-mission West Point, like I said, a big thing was there was like there was that senior missionary couple who kind of adopted all of the strays, and which was all cadets, right? We didn't really have anything going on. And they also, again, like culturally, the first ones especially, love them to death, but they were very, very transparently of the mindset of like, we need there were only 2 or 3 female cadets pretty much my entire time at West Point, female LDS cadets. So most of the time was we need to get these boys good female, good active Mormon girls to talk to. Otherwise they're going to lose their light. They're going to make them, they'll mess up before their mission. So there's like this weird, retirees throwing parties for 19-year-olds to meet girls, at West Point.
Like nannies that were, back east from Utah.
Yeah, a lot of like au pair nannies in the city, girls that went to Seton Hall. I was really good friends with like one of them over the years, but yeah, it was just one of those things. It was such. It's looking back, it's like, what a weird way to meet somebody. Like somebody was literally just like, hey, you want to meet some marriageable Mormon boys? Like
from West Point, highly trained.
Exactly. Yeah. But
highly trained and disciplined.
And then,
but also for you, we've rounded up a bunch of young women and we want to pair you with them.
Yeah. So it was like Mormonism makes young adulthood weird, man. I will say I whatever deity I owe, or the branch was not a young single adult ward. They just didn't have the resources to support that. So I wasn't awkwardly trying to date 40 girls, every night of the week. It was, well, I've got CTR 7s, I gotta make sure that, they know the plan of salvation. You
were teaching primary to 7-year-olds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As like a 19 or 20-year-old, So, like I said, I think I missed out. Well, I briefly had it when we're about to get to that, but, singles ward is...
So not a robust dating life at West Point.
No. So, but I still met girls, I was saying Instagram was still this new weird frontier. So there was a Mormon girl that I flew up to, be my date to every class has one formal a year. So, you have plebe parent weekend, you have, and then yearling winter weekend, and then 500th night, which celebrates 500 nights until you graduate. And then 100th night is 100 nights to graduate. So junior, senior year there. But yeah, so for yearling winter weekend, we all, we all got dates. Some of the Seton Hall girls, asked them to call up their friends in Riverton or whatever. So, I had a really tight knit group of classmates, for the 2016, 2018 group. One of them, he was in my basic training squad for All the Beast. I talk to him every day. He's my, he's a brother for sure. But yeah, so it's one of those things. It's we all got the idea that we knew girls are scary and dangerous, and we were within a year of putting in our mission papers. So we couldn't let girls get us alone in a room because they would, we're just weak little men. And, everybody knows in Mormonism that girls make you do bad things. So, so we Airbnb'd a house in Brooklyn, and we all 10 of us or whatever total with our dates stayed and had the weird nanny separation of bed, for nighttime or whatever. And again, just really weird to have that level of, it's guys, 20, 19, 20, I don't know, 21, we should have been drinking, we should have been making stupid little decisions, not if they touch me, then I'm going to hell.
Right.
And I failed God.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. So I did, I failed God in that instance. All of our our safety measures, couldn't triumph, human evolution. So nothing even real happened, right? Not to embarrass you too much, but the first, I lost my virginity to my wife, but it's but I still, did fooled around, and it was devastating to me. It was 8 months out from when I was supposed to leave on a mission, and I was broken. Everybody who had said anything negative about me was right. You know, how dare I be 20 and sexually attracted to somebody? And it was devastating. I remember bawling to the drummer in the West Point band about how terrible I was and how unworthy I was and how I've ruined everything and how there are people that I was supposed to find on my mission and save. There were generations of people that were the eternity was upended because I wasn't strong enough. It was devastating. And bless his heart, like he was one of those wins in leadership roulette. Very few truer Christians I've known than this gentleman, but you know, he's like objectively like, yeah, you messed up, but nothing's permanent, nothing's forever. Like, let's talk about it. You know, what are we doing forward? So, you know, like, obviously I had to stop talking to the girl because she was evil and wrong and dumb. And honestly, like, kudos to her. I think she was also really like my first experience with like non-orthodoxy, right? Cause like my thing was this like, oh, like you know, it's like, oh, like you've made me feel the way, like I love you. And she's like, no, like we were just having fun. And I was like, oh, no, you don't understand. Like, if I feel this way, I have to love you. We have to be wed, right? Because that's like Mormonism does to you. You know, if you feel any sort of sexual attraction, like it has to be stifled and damped down real hard. And that's why you see people getting married like a month out of, you know, at BYU and divorced 5 years later with 4 kids. Like,
it either needs to be tramped down or a sign that you're supposed to be eternal companions.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you would marry them to make it okay that you actually
have feelings for each other.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how prescriptive the leadership handbook was, but I met weekly and monthly with both my stake president and branch president. And they ultimately decided that I was, you know, I was penitent. You know, shame has never been a difficult thing for me to feel, you know. So they definitely felt that I was truly repentant and, you know, like I wasn't trying to mess around with anybody, you know, like I wasn't watching porn or anything stupid. Like, so they were like, hey, like you're good to go. So like I felt like everything was good. Like you know, summer of 2014. So
I just want to note, I'm noticing a parallel, and I don't know if this will ring true for you, but it's almost like the Mormon worthiness repentance process is its own form of spiritual or religious basic training, because it breaks you down to the lowest point to then build you back up and make you feel subservient to the organization or to the power structure. That's a parallel that just kind of occurred to me, and I'm wondering if you experienced it that way or not.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of, again, a little bit of an older talk that I loved. And it was using the allegory of the currant bush. I think it actually became when the church was playing around with their little YouTube video Mormon messages stuff. I think it got made into like one of those like you know, the artsy videos. But yeah, it talks about how we need to have the faith to be cut down by God. And that when God does cut us back, similar to the currant bush, we shouldn't say, why God, I was so beautiful, I was growing, I was doing everything you want. We need to say, thank you so much for loving me enough to cut me down.
Interesting.
And I think that also, that type of mindset speaks to the high control aspect of things. You know, it's not that you should be alarmed or you should feel on edge when somebody tries to normalize, you know, tearing you down. It's that no, this is actually good. This is how we improve. This is how I get better.
Yeah.
Okay, so is mission next?
Yeah. So I'm on my mission. I think the summer of 2014. Yeah, that sounds right.
Where were you called?
I was called to the Taiwan Taipei mission. And like, it was one of those things, like, again, my best friend, he was called to Myanmar or Thailand, but he ended up in Myanmar for like most of his mission. I had a buddy, he ended up in Mozambique. Another guy, we weren't super close, but he was still a good dude. He was in the Taichung mission. So there were like everybody that went to Yearling Winter Weekend ended up like putting in papers and leaving at the same time. But so that was cool because like we left. I was first at the MTC, and then my buddy was a week later, and then a few weeks after that. And then because I was going to Taipei, I had a super long MTC experience. Mine was actually even longer, and that was one of the first, like, again, real jarring things with Mormonism in general was very basic, government paperwork is very clear cut. At the beginning of 2014, Taipei changed a form that needed to be filled out for visas. The church travel department submitted like 80 something visa requests in like May with a 6-month expired form. And they literally just hoped that it would go through because God wants his missionaries there. So my 8 weeks at the MTC became 12 and a half weeks at the MTC. And it was all because somebody was just bad at their job. And it was one of those things where I remember being reprimanded because I was like, this is stupid. Somebody messed up. And they're like, no. The Lord works in mysterious ways. You just weren't meant to be there. And I was like, why would the Lord mean for someone to be inept at their job? It's like, it's one of, again, like the binary thinking, right? It's like this person was bad at their job. That's why, like, did God make them bad at their job? That's stupid. This is dumb. You guys are dumb. Like, God doesn't have to be in everything. He doesn't have to be in people's stupid mistakes. Like, they could just be mistakes and we can move on. But yeah, so the MTC was terrible, jarring. I hated it. I felt like I had lost all my autonomy, even though I was 20. I'd been paying taxes for 3 years. I'd been on my own for 3 years. I'd voted in an election. I was being infantilized. I was being talked down at. A kid who literally was like barely 18. His name was a general authority's name. So magically by revelation, he was the zone leader for our group. And that one, again, bothered me because I didn't know about cronyism and Mormonism because SoCal isn't the Holy Land. There was racism. There's a lot of racism. I think the
MTC?
To this day, so having been stationed in New York, Georgia, living in Southern California, visited my brother a bunch in Alabama, spending some time in Texas. The most I've ever heard just the use of the N-word was at the MTC.
What?
Wow.
In 2014,
2014. And I will say, I don't think it's because everybody secretly has a dad who was, a Klan member on the side. I think it's because in Utah, there's a blindness to the existence of minorities. It was just a word that people got upset by. I think it just wasn't real to them. I think a lot of them had never seen a black person in their life outside of rap music videos or TV, Yeah. So it was one of those things where, like, I tried to, like, hey, like, guys, this isn't okay. And, they laugh, like, oh, no, we're just playing around. It's like, no, like, guys, like, it's not something you play with. Like, like, words have meanings. And, like, there's a lot of context with this. And I will say, like, most of them, at least respected me enough to not say it around me. But it was one of those things, like, the first, like, night was just jarring. It was one of those things, like, after there was, like, a weird, like, 10, 15 minute period between like last class or devotional and like shower time, lights out. So there was like this really Like that was when like just the squirrel brained 18-year-old boys just getting their wiggles out. Like it was just a bunch of stupid dudes being stupid dudes. And unfortunately, one of the most jarring manifestations of that was just casual racism. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, the MTC, I will say, like my MTC companion, this is one of the best dudes ever. Like, yeah, again, if there's a God, like he was like one of the most significant proofs I have for the existence of a loving deity. Like he was calming. He understood where I was coming from. He shared in a lot of my outrage, which I think was
Helpful.
was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and the other thing too, it's like I was very athletic at West Point. Like I enjoyed athleticism. I thought, being athletic meant I could be violent and effective. So I had fun, like every more like boring BYU boy. Like I actually, I liked rock climbing. I liked mountain biking. I grew up shooting guns. Like I played water polo. I swam. I did wrestling. I did combatives at West Point. That type of stuff. So like I got really stir crazy at the MTC, it's like, and then it was like you could run around a little bit, but it's like if your companion didn't want to run, you had to be their companion, so it was like, luckily he was ready to, and he was like this super athletic ski kid, like we'd be in class, like in our like mock, like interview sessions or whatever, like, meeting with an investigator, and he would like tilt, and I could tell he was just like imagining like doing a backflip on his skis type of thing. He's a goofy kid, but he was a good dude. But yeah, I found out that I established a legacy that got reprimanded by one of the 70 at the MTC. We found an old room that wasn't being lived in, and we started a fight club.
Oh my goodness, you started a fight club in the Mormon MTC?
I did.
Mission Training Center?
That's why I'm here now.
Like punching each other with fists in the face?
Yeah.
What?
So the time that I was in, there was also a naval midshipman who was going to Taiwan. He was going to Australia, but China, Mandarin speaking. And there was also a Air Force cadet, or Zumia. Yeah, I think it's cadet, who was also going to Taichung. So we had like me, my buddy my buddy from West Point who like did Krav Maga growing up, like we would once a week like tackle and grapple, just being stupid, having fun, doing jujitsu type of stuff or whatever. And the naval midshipman, he was actually on the wrestling team or the judo team. And it was one of those things where we were just like, again, during that 10-15 minute window of just like people taking showers, like, you don't have to shower with your companion. So it's like, oh, they're going out to the showers. I'm just staying here, write a letter or something stupid, to get, writing a letter to the girl who's going to drown me in a week type of thing. So like, we just found this room and I was like, hey dude, like you want to roll around for a bit? And they're like, no, that's dumb. And then like the next day, like at lunch, he was like, yo dude, we should roll around tonight. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So like we just started doing it, and it's one of those things that like 2 people became 4 people, became 10 people, became 20 people.
What?
Wow.
And then I left, and it was still happening, and I had heard that they had a it was a zone conference, but they had a conference for the entire building, like 6 months later. Like one of the guys on island, I was saying like in Taiwan, it was like one of the things somebody was like, like just talking, like on splits and stuff, like, oh, like how's the MTC and stuff, like, oh, it's pretty good. We got in a lot of trouble the first week though. And I was like, why? He's like, well, somebody started a fight club and like, I guess somebody, like people got hurt or something. And they said like, it's not Christ-like. And like, we just all felt really bad. And I was just like, I just remember that's like, yeah.
You were like, oops.
You were like, imagine that.
But
someone started.
That was probably the only way I got through that thing. Like it was, like I said, it was devastating. So my grandfather,
I have to ask, would you have ever done a fight club at West Point?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you don't
It's
like,
part of the classes,
yeah,
probably.
yeah.
It's part of your life.
I actually, you're graded on it for one.
Okay.
I actually broke my hand in a midterm for combatives, and I actually broke my back in a higher level combatives class like a year after that.
Oh, man.
So it's basically Mormon MTC combatives.
Yeah. When I say combatives, it was just like you don't hit in the face unless both parties agree to hitting in the face, or just hitting in general, and you go until somebody taps out or just says they don't want to go, because that's the thing, because like there are some guys that are
There's some
soft.
ethics
Yeah.
there.
So it's
You've
like,
got
bro.
ethics
Exactly.
So, bro, face hit or no face hit?
Yeah,
He's like,
exactly.
oh, face hit. Okay, face hit. Let's go.
Exactly.
But I think what you're speaking to, I mean, in a small way, I relate in that
What?
let me explain. As someone who ran in college, where every day there's training, I'm training every day, to go from that to a place where I have no release energy wise to what I'm used to, to the physicality of what I'm used to every day, to change that up to like, you're going to sit a lot of your day. You're going to be listening to like a lot of learning a lot. Or I do think that is like that flip is huge for a body. If you're used to physicality kind of day in, day out, that energy outlet, that training, I really can see needing some type of something to meet you. Yeah. Otherwise, you have this feeling like energy-wise that you're just teeming all the time.
Yeah.
Also, I think infantilize, I think you used that word. I think that is an appropriate word for Mormon missionaries, because like at what age are you never allowed to be alone?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, 5?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that's what a Mormon missionary is. They're literally not allowed to be alone. And they're treated like they're babies, kind of, or little children in some ways. And that's got to be, for someone who is in freaking West Point on your own, like you said, that's got to be just stir crazy. Got to drive you crazy.
Yeah. And the thing that really bothered me was every criticism was, well, you can't say that because this is the Lord's way. You know? And it's like, yeah, and that's the thing, like with the physicality, it's like I woke up every morning, like I woke up at 5:30, I'd swim a mile at least. And then if I had time, I'd run 2 miles, and then my day would start. And then usually like every semester you had some sort of class, like whether it was boxing or combatives or like they called it military movement, which was like basically this like, I don't know, like early Ninja Warrior type of like haze that you just have to do. Like you're like crawling under stuff and doing like pull up over this and running, you know, sprinting 3 laps around this little track and stuff. And, you know, like lifetime sports, like I did scuba diving, and like you have like, combat survival swimming. So it's like you're swimming, but you have like a dummy rifle with you and your like 10-pound helmet and your 20-pound plate carrier and stuff. And you have to like, you know, swim laps with that type of thing and stuff, or like, you know, so I was like, yeah, like it was very jarring to like go from, you know, burning, you know, a few thousand calories a day and like really working out and stuff to being told like you have like a 45-minute window in the morning or 1 hour, and you know, people are playing Foursquare or walking. That's the other thing too. It's like you get people that would just walk around. Like you couldn't do the track because like people would just walk in a line and block off the track. So yeah, it was like I said, it just stir crazy. Like and it was tough.
Fun. That's a fun story.
Yeah.
I think you had kind of mentioned earlier too, feeling like you were exposed to a church you didn't really recognize during that time. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, growing up Southern California, the church is true. You know, Dallin H. Oaks visited when I was like 9 or 10 and gave a talk, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then I heard the same talk 2 years later, and I was like, oh, that's a bummer. He used the same thing.
He didn't even bother to change the talk.
Exactly. He didn't even change anything. It was like his jokes were better timed, I guess. But I'm pretty sure that's just because like Mormons are conditioned to laugh at bad jokes in conference settings. But yeah, so it was one of those things like, I assumed everybody was having the same experience I was, and then coming to like even so the church is anemic on the East Coast. the geographical spread because of the low numbers. Again, it was one of those things. It's like we didn't have we were a branch. We were definitely big enough to be a ward, but we didn't have a meeting house because like there just wasn't, there wasn't enough to justify like, building another thing close by. But, so going from that, especially, where it's like you had to drive an hour and a half to go to like stake priesthood session, to, it's like, oh, like we're all from the same high school, 10 minutes down the road. And I don't know why that guy's here because everybody knows he did hand stuff on prom night with his girlfriend, just like all this weird stuff. And, like the last name stuff, and like Huntsman. I'm like, okay, what's that? And I was like, and so, I got along with him really well. He was a good dude. Like a huntsman, and it was weird. And again, one of those weird jarring things is like, we would just be sitting and people would be like, how much money do you have? And I was like, what culture is that okay to ask, and I think maybe that's why we got along okay. It's because I guess I didn't know what the huntsman name was or like the affluency that was like associated with that. But he was just a good dude and he wasn't weird like some of the other dudes that were really weird. And I think that's like culture, like Mormon culture makes a lot of people weird. And I say that, like I know like the military makes it strange, you got to screw loose, but it's like, man, there's some stuff. It's like y'all didn't have any other archetypes to try to emulate. The culture of Provo, like BYU kind of adjacent was just really weird, really unsettling to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, anything kind of important from your mission for your story?
Yeah. I got really sick.
In Taiwan?
In Taiwan. Well, actually, I started getting sick in the MTC. And I like kind of tried to hide it. Didn't want to mess up, the window or anything to go. So sorry, I don't want to do this too much, but going back. So, when I was at West Point, I had gone to Oklahoma for some travel thing and I ate a raw bull testicle, like straight off of the bull. I got an infection from that, but we didn't know that. So, I got sick in the MTC and I got hit with well, are there any sins you didn't confess to? And I had sinned, but like I said, I was very penitent, very, like the self-flagellation type stuff. Like I was like, nobody thought less of me than me for my weaknesses.
And you had talked to...
Exactly.
You had already talked.
And I had disclosed it. So I honestly answered in the MTC, like, I don't have anything unresolved. Like, I want to be here. I know I'm worthy to be here.
Was the bull testicle like a dare?
Like, could we follow up on that? Like, what type of situation or what motivates someone to have a dare. A raw bull testicle?
Yeah, it was a dare. It was a hazing thing that I guess this guy did to all the missionaries, and I was meeting his daughter, so he thought it'd be funny to haze me too. And I guess everybody just always
So a church member encouraged you to eat a raw bull testicle in what state?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. You did say Mormons were weird.
But anyway, so that happened. No.
All right. So you're getting sick.
Yeah, I'm getting sick. I'm throwing up.
Because of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, again, the delay happened. I was so frustrated. Yeah. They decided that they didn't want us sitting longer than 12 weeks, so they sent us on like stateside-ish missions to visa wait. And I went up to Ogden for like 2 weeks. And then it was a miracle that I was like, no, there's just a 90-day wait. And anyway. So we got our stuff. We were a whole transfer and a half delayed And we were a big group because, like I said, we were like one of the first like 18-year-old waves from when they did the change, the mission age change. So there was like 90 plus of us coming in all at once. Like we literally doubled the mission size like in one transfer. So
because there are women too.
Yeah,
half women.
A lot of them. So that's the thing. It was like my MTC time was like, a couple of my military buddies type of thing, like cadets or what have you. And then a bunch of girls who had done 1 year at BYU or BYU Idaho, and because of that, they were all infinitely more mature than everybody, especially me. And I'm supposed to be the grumpy old man, and I'm encouraging people to get into fist fights. But we get on island, and I get my trainer. He's a good dude, and I'm throwing up more and more. It's the summer in Taiwan. And I start throwing up blood. I was like 185, pretty good muscle tone when I started my mission. I got down to like 130.
Whoa. That's 55 pounds, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't good. And I just kept asking for help. God bless them. The Taiwanese people, the members there, they believed with all their heart. They wanted to help me. There's this like Gatorade basically called Supao. It's grapefruit Gatorade, and they were convinced that like if I drank more Supao, I'd be healed. And I'm like, guys, I appreciate it, but like I'm really this isn't working for me.
But what about your mission in president though?
So, I don't know what he thought about me, but he was convinced that I was sick because I had sinned. And it got to the point where, again, I was throwing up blood, lost incredible amounts of muscle mass. And, like, from what I understand, like, my companion had been directed to try to draw it out of me because I had met with him a couple times en route to like a doctor meeting, and basically was like maybe it's this, right? Like literally like, like got blood on my cheek type of thing. Like maybe it's because, maybe this is happening because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not really worthy. And then, so my companion has me call this mission president, and he just says, I know. So I go, right next to the temple. And then within that day, like you would think that I was, I don't know, you'd think I was like murdering children or something. Like within 48 hours of that, I was interviewed, really creepy interview. Just, well, what did you do? What did she do? What do you mean she didn't? Every man wants that. But like, again, just weird stuff.
Wait, so this is a worthiness interview about what happened before your mission?
Yeah.
Things you had already repented of multiple
because the
times?
lens was that you were, this is so painful, I would imagine, for you too, because it plays into the whole broken thing. But you're actually having a legitimate illness, a reaction to eat, and you didn't know it then. No. But instead of getting you to a doctor or someone who can really do a read on the situation, they're taking the lens that you've sinned in some way. The reason why you're sick, you're throwing up blood, you've lost 50 pounds, is because of some past thing you've done. Is that right?
Yeah, it was transgression. It was a sin-sick soul.
That, by the way, you had already repented of, sounds like multiple times.
Yeah.
That sounds horrible.
So I came home. I got back home the day before my...
Wait, they sent you home to the United States?
They sent me home to the United States.
Not for illness, but for worthiness?
For worthiness.
Wow.
So,
How many months into your total mission?
Would have been just shy of 6.
Dang.
Yeah. So, and that's one of those things, it's like I said, it was the day before my 21st birthday. I flew in. They made it really clear I needed to be released as fast as possible because there's some sort of missionary superpower that I wasn't entitled to. And then they made sure I knew that it was a dishonorable release.
I'm so sorry.
And again, you didn't have sex with some woman in Taiwan or date women or break mission rules in some way that was...
Well, and by the way, you're so sick. You are throwing up blood.
Yeah.
You are suffering.
Yeah.
You have lost 50 pounds is a lot of weight on one human body,
Yeah.
So now what you're having psychological, emotional suffering now. Instead of seeing a doctor and tending to that,
Right. Really
you're now being
insult to
punished,
injury.
sent home kind of in shame, really wanting you to feel the shame too.
And there's a shame parade to be sent back to your home ward because everybody knows you came home early and they're going to assume that you had sex with somebody, right?
Yeah. Why do you come home early?
Because that's the assumption. That's the only real reason someone would be sent home.
Right.
Either you're sick or you had sex. But if you're being sent home without honor, then the only option is you had sex with someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So that was the circumstance I came back with. It was, like I said, it was devastating. Like this is something I believed in. This is something I wanted. Like, I would folly, sure, but I felt crushing remorse for that, and I was still sick. Like that was the other thing too. I wasn't getting any better. Like I was throwing up water. And it was one of those things where it's like I'd have to eat, just hoping stuff would stay down, just so I was getting something, but I obviously wasn't getting that much because I was still losing so much weight. I will say the one thing the church did right is I had TRICARE, right? Like I had military medicine up until I left on my mission. I had resigned, so I was no longer in reserve status or anything with the military. So
you lost your health care.
Yeah. So the church said if I were to see doctors in the Salt Lake area, they would cover the medical bills. So, and I will say the other thing too, like that's important that, again, one of those, like just the bottom dropping out for me was the stake president at the time was, again, this spirit, like of my home ward or my dad's home ward, right? The ward I hadn't attended in 3 years. They made him release me, and he was the one who was the Green Beret. He was the one who was the, the military man and who had been a pillar of Mormonism and righteousness my entire, childhood. And he, I think, set me apart, but it was literally just like, he got the okay from my leadership that I'd been with for 3 years, the congregation that I'd been a part of. And when he came back, he just, it almost felt smug, just the way that he said, I knew you'd be here.
Yeah.
He said, I knew you weren't worthy to leave. And I know it's painful, but I'm so glad you're here now. And that was like, just like so many layers. Like that was just
so devastating.
Yeah, that was brutal.
I'm really sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I very much ashamed, feeling like a pariah. I think I stayed in town for about 10 days. And then luckily by that time, my mom had remarried, and she actually married somebody who lives in Park City. So my mom was like, hey, you could stay with me for, and so I moved in kind of with my mom. And again, it was one of those things where it's like I'd been fully independent, like, you know, I'm in the military, but I was like my own man, you know, paying taxes, like whatever. And here I am, like living at like my stepdad's garage. And like I just felt like just the most pathetic person in the world, you know? And yeah, so I just kind of, I had to double down, you know? So I found the singles ward and I went, and it was awkward and uncomfortable. And every time I didn't know if I can go back to West Point, and I was still throwing up blood. And
So have you not seen a doctor yet?
not really. I didn't see a doctor until like 8 weeks after being stateside. So the lowest my weight got was like 131.
So looking back on that, what is the reason for that?
So I actually didn't get closure on it until later in the story.
Okay. So maybe we'll wait on that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just feeling so much for you though
Yeah.
right now,
So
because it feels a little like there's some neglect here for you,
yeah.
for people who are witnessing you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I will say, like, my dad offered the help that he could, you know, but like, he's an electrician. You know, it's not like he really has, outside of church, it's not like he had like connections or really anybody he can get me into type of thing, you know. And my mom, same thing, like she, you know, when there was an offer for medical care, like at least my parents, I know that they really, I know it was heartbreaking for them. And I will say my dad, out of how orthodox he was, I think the trials that he's faced in his life gave him a more nuanced view than I was able to see Mormonism or to see my own experience. So he never made me feel like I was broken or bad, or in that way. I do, you know, he loved me the best way he could. And you know, he definitely, he didn't make it any worse. But yeah, so I guess I'm stateside. I'm living in Utah now. Like I said, I'm in this really weird limbo because the way I saw it, I had a 2-year window to be on a mission. And at the year mark, I was supposed to start reapplying, because that's the thing. You don't just get back in.
To West Point. Yeah.
You have to reapply. You have to get a congressional nomination again. You have to do the physical fitness test that all entry are required to do. So, concurrent to figuring out whether or not I was going to go to West Point a year early or what, I saw a doctor, and they were basically just like, oh, it looks like really bad food allergies. You know, MSG is really big in Taiwan. And at the time, I didn't have the wherewithal to be like, well, actually, like, I started throwing up, like, in the MTC. So I went on a really strict deletion diet, like, essentially just, like, really regimented veganism. Just because, you know, the idea was that, like, you know, it could be preservatives, it could be this, you know, yeah, but we're at this point, like, we know, you know, like, you should be able to hold this down. And so it's a combination of like a very restricted diet and then just some like really heavy, like, anti-nausea medication, you know, and it was one of those things where it was like, it started, like, it stabilized, but then it started kind of going into like a cycle. So then they were like, there was a period of time, because it unfortunately, so it was looking like I was getting better. And the other really arbitrary thing was the mission president said, the way I see it, you have to have been, it's like 1.5 years or 2 years from the sin. So he basically said, you know, it's November right now. If you're worthy in February, you can come back. So he sent me home for 2 months in his mind. But who was I to question the Lord's anointed? Who was I to, you know, obviously be an advocate for myself, really? So I actually got a doctor to sign off saying that I'd gotten better in like March, April timeframe. And the stake president up in Park City was just a rad dude. I think it's one of those things like the amount of money in Park City makes him less of a full Utah Mormon. Kind of sees the world through a more nuanced view, but he was great. He helped make me feel worthy and loved and capable, and like I deserved to be healthy and to be a missionary again. And I decided not to reapply to West Point because I wanted to go back out on the mission. And I went back. And I like kind of felt like I had this weird like homecoming thing where like all of my contemporaries were now training people, and my trainer was one of the assistants of the president, and and like and in that regard, like there was a cultural there was like a hey, like you made it, we're so happy, whatever. And it just felt weird that like I had to carry shame for being sick. And I went back on the week before this, the mission presidents changed. So the last act of the mission president that sent me home was that he wasn't sure I was living a righteous enough life, in Utah, going to doctor's appointments, working a job. So he wanted me to redo the entire 12-week training program. So I had to be retrained on island and had to go back through, and had a kid who literally was like 18, fresh out of high school, be my trainer. And I'm like 22 at this point, or like 21 and a half, and, but again, like I had to take it. It was, it was Lord's anointed. You can't speak ill of them. So
seems humiliating.
Yeah, it was yeah. And it was one of those things where, again, like I don't like to like prescribe like malice, but there's a few like interactions I've had in my life where it's like, I don't know how to view this. Like, I don't know how to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like, this just feels petty. Like, this feels punitive. So started again and going through the 12-week program, and bless his heart, the kid who was training me, like, he was so sincere. The living conditions for missionaries are atrocious. I don't know how, I'm sorry, this is a complete random thing, but one of the distinct memories I have is there was a 2-bedroom apartment that we had all to ourselves in this city, Ilan, and it was like on the kind of like north coast, and one of the rooms was just locked shut, and it had become the missionary dumping room where, like, floor to ceiling, there was just garbage, like old, like missionaries going home, didn't want to bring luggage with them. And there was black mold on the entire room. And I remember just like trying to have a conversation with this kid, like, hey dude, like we need to clean this up. Like, this isn't safe. This isn't healthy. And they were like, oh, well, the mission home just told us to lock the door. So, well, I have some pictures of, it was so thick that I was able to write my name in Chinese with a sponge of bleach on the wall. That's how much black mold there was. So, it was one of those things where he was very obedient and strict in his obedience, but he was also willing to work with me when I was like, hey, like, we need to clean, and we need more time to clean than the 15 minutes. Like, we need to wake up an hour early to clean this today, because like this is a health hazard. So he tolerated that, and then I had to start applying to West Point again. So he dragged himself to the track with me, where I would run 5 miles in the morning, and he was supportive, and things were going pretty good. And one of the sister missionaries in the area was one of like the MTC, sister missionaries. So it was like really cool to see her, and she was nice, and but I started throwing up again after being there for about 10 or 11 weeks.
Is it possible? And I got sick on my mission. I got sent home, and for me, it was respiratory problems, like asthma, and it was severe.
Yeah.
And I finished my mission in Arizona, but later I was tested and it was discovered that maybe I had a dust mite allergy, and the particular dust mites in Guatemala were super bad, but then going to Arizona, it was better. But I also look back, and it's just factual that my mission was incredibly abusive and traumatic.
Yeah.
So I've wondered whether, there's this idea the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
So I don't want to minimize whatever severity of your medical situation or mine, but it's always been in the back of my mind, was my body just reacting to a situation that was actually just super unethical or super problematic? Have you thought about that at all? Or
I have, yeah. And it's one of those things like now, like, I'm a little over halfway through like my graduate studies in, marriage and family therapy, clinical psychology. So yeah, like there's been a lot of deconstruction, just sitting with myself. Like, I don't think, so like, I feel like that would be kind of getting into the realm of almost like a conversion disorder.
Yeah.
It was one thing, like I was technically like being looked at for treated for at one point, which pretty quickly it wasn't the case. But which isn't to say that would have made it any less real or any less dangerous or significant.
Exactly.
I think conversion disorders especially have a really bad rap when you say it's all in your head. It's like, well, it'll still kill you, so we still really need to. But I don't say lucky, unlucky. There was a very Western medicine approved diagnoses. Kind of one of those things, like once it was actually identified, like, 2 months of one specific pill, and things have been generally fine since.
Well, let's just jump to that.
Yeah.
What was
I'm
the
guessing
diagnosis?
intestinal.
Yeah. So it was one thing that kept tipping the other off, and then they just kept kind of going.
Was it
back
like
and forth.
C. diff or
eosinophilic esophagitis, and then H. pylori.
Oh, H. pylori.
So the belief was the H. pylori infection came from body temperature, raw bull testicle.
Yeah.
And that went really untreated for months. And eventually that got bad enough where I started getting ulcers. And then the aggravation of the ulcers then just kind of caused this like teeter-totter effect of like the ulcers would cause me to throw up blood, but then like the ulcers would also cause issues further down my GI, and then so really it was just back and forth, and then there wasn't really any good intervention, which is why to a degree that like the deletion diet did help in some, because I'm sure there was, like everybody, like there probably was like some minor dairy that was causing a little bit of, like gluten or whatever, so it's like there could have been some sensitivity that wasn't helping it. But I was by no means better. And it's one of those things where I was getting treatment, fast forwarding now. It took like a full year, almost a year and a half back. Like I was in the middle of my senior year at West Point when they finally said, this is what it is. This is how we treat it. We're not going to let you commission as an officer unless we get this fixed. And they got it fixed, and they let me commission.
Was it antibiotics? Like what fixed it?
Yeah. So antibiotic, there's a bunch of stuff. So like I was because of like, again, like the prevalence of like the vomiting, they had me on like GERD medication essentially, so I was like, I had stuff for stomach acid. I had stuff for like a different regimen of antibiotics, for, like the infectious stuff that was actually in there. There was it was one of those things, like if they said it had failed, their next step would have been like fecal transplant, but didn't have to get all the way there. But like it was just one of those things where like it became like a full regimen. And and the other thing too, like the military, for their part, they were like, hey, like we need to fix you up or you need to get out. So they fixed it up. And yeah, it was one of those things where it was kind of weird because there was like a 3 year period almost where it was just like, oh, like you have, so they just called it cyclic vomiting syndrome. So a syndrome is really not helpful. And where they basically, they're like, are you smoking weed? Like, no, I'm not smoking. Like, oh, well, people throw up a lot sometimes if they smoke weed. It's like, well, I don't smoke weed, so what's next? So they, they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, you're like the current medication we have you on, like the anti-nausea stuff, like that makes it go from like nonstop to like 3 or 4 days at a time. 3 to 4 days is manageable, you know? So that's kind of how they saw it. And that's where it stood for a while they did. Cause I was actually like, even as a cadet, like I had to go down to like Walter Reed and stuff, and they were doing endoscopies, and they were, you know, doing all sorts of labs and whatnot. But it did get fixed. It did get resolved. And it wasn't because I should feel like a dirty little boy for being attracted to women. You know.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So, yeah. So
You
with
had
that, I guess,
something
spoiler
actually-
alert.
Yeah.
I threw up one time, and I would say the new mission president, they have to have gotten briefed on me. But they were loving, they were supportive, they were kind. They actually went out of their way to try to get me like medical attention if I needed it. But I threw up one time, and it was immediately throwing up blood. And they're like, "We're really sorry, but like if you're throwing up blood, like it's not safe for you to be here. You have to go home." And I was like, "You know, you don't understand. Like I'm supposed to be here. Like, you know, like God healed me to be back out here." You know, like, and it's when I was saying this, like, you know, in the moment, I was like, "You guys don't get it." Like I you know, it's like I respectfully disagree. Like you don't understand. Like I'm supposed to be here. You know, it's like I've overcome. You know, I've overcome my weakness. Or like I've overcome my shortcoming.
Oh my gosh.
And
This is
so
just,
so I came home early a second time. At least this time, they gave me a day to like call my parents, let them know. So my parents actually, by this point in time, my sister had moved like up here. So like they, you know, I got my little arriving in the Salt Lake airport, and they had a little sign for me.
You had a homecoming at the airport.
Yeah. But I still felt like I wasn't supposed to be there and stuff. And I actually tried working with doctors so I can get cleared and go out a third time. I actually applied a third time. And I got told by, it's one of those things now, I'll never know if he actually submitted my paperwork or if he just sat on it and said, "Hey buddy, we need to talk. You're loved. You did enough." Or if that came from, you know, the mission department. But I was told March of 2016, when like I'd resubmitted my paperwork again, that like, "No, like you've done enough. Thank you. You can move on with your life." And that was like, move on with your life. Go have kids, you know? And that got really hard because I was 22, twice returned missionary. I think total I had a little less than like a year out in the field. And I was living in Utah. Again, it's one of those things, like my sister had, like I said, just bought a house. So like they were still pretty early on in their marriage. Like they didn't have kids or anything. So they're like, "Hey, we have like 3 spare bedrooms. Do you want to live in one?" You know, until you go back to West Point. Cause West Point, like you could only leave or return like in the summer cycle. So I was waiting for the summer of 2016 to return and, you know, pick back up. And, you know, I did, like, I went to the Taylorsville YSA ward and it was uncomfortable. And I was in this really weird position. I was like a pressure to meet a girl because there weren't really like Mormon females back there.
So hurry and get married so you could bring the wife back.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like, I wouldn't call like baby trap, but like relationship trap, a girl that will be okay dating you long. Cause that's the other thing. You can't be married as a cadet at West Point. So it's a really hard sell to tell, you know, a young Mormon woman like, "Hey, let's date for at least 2 years." Like that's an eternity. And
it's quite counter to the narrative.
Exactly. So, and you know, I'll be honest, like mission made me weird. Like I had that, you know, like Mormonism infantilizes men. Like, I don't know how you feel about that, John, but it's like there's, you know, the discourse around the patriarchy and stuff. Like I've never seen a more like impotent male than like a bishop who legitimately thinks that they can control the heavens and the earth, and that they think they have authority, or they believe people owe them reverence or something. Yeah, it's just kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those things I was like, well, grappling with the sexist ideas of like, well, God will provide a woman for me, not I should be improving myself or, make sure that I'm not being socially awkward. Like, it was no, just keep praying and a woman is a prize. So I will be provided with one because I held up my end of the bargain.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when I met my wife. Yeah, she's great. And like, just, I don't know. It's like, I feel it's one of those things like I didn't realize at the time, but it's like every woman I had ever seen before her was just kind of like blurry, like I never really saw anyone in perfect clarity until I saw her. And she had wanted nothing to do with me. I met her. So while I was on island the first time, there was a girl who, so one of the sister missionaries, she broke her leg riding her bike during a typhoon warning, and she had a compound fracture. She had to be flown home with her like femur popping out of her leg, like real gnarly. So she was actually like my one friend here because she came home early and
you trauma bonded basically.
Exactly. She got it.
Because you both, that is traumatic.
Yeah.
Both of you have experienced significant.
Yeah. So we I was saying, like, we hung out, and it was annoying because my sister's like, you're going to marry her. And it's like, dude, it's like, I don't see her that way. Like this, let this just be a friendship. Like, it's like I was thinking, it's like all my West Point buddies are on their mission still. It's like, I just need a friend, so it was her birthday. And one of her like pre-mission like kind of roommates, like she lived down the hall. They went to UVU together, their freshman year, and like I met her. And again, by this point, like I had sincerely tried, prayed, fasted, to meet a girl that would wait for me to go to West Point and back, and would be, the type of woman that could handle a long distance relationship and stuff. And like every date I had been on that like I was actually hoping would be an actual date or like it was one of those things where it's like, you hit it off, whatever, things are fine, nothing really is being said. But when the mission came up, it was just like, there was just no salvaging the conversation after that. Yeah. So I would say the two reactions, and it was just these two, like, except for like, like my wife really was just like indifferent, which was honestly like the best I could ever hope for. The one reaction was like, like, oh, wait, where did you serve your mission? Not like if you're going, whatever. So like there in the marriage mindset has to be an RM, so it's like, where'd you go? I was like, oh, I went to Taiwan. Like, oh, that's great. How were you there? I was like, oh, well, I actually just got back. Like, oh, really? When did you leave? And like, and so you'd see the mental math of like, that's less than 24 months ago.
They're fishing to know if you had a full 2-year honorable return mission.
So, and there were a couple, like, I don't blame them, it's like, kudos to them for knowing what they want. And especially like, I know it's always hard, like, there's social pressure for women to say yes to someone when they don't want to. But like, I had a few that were just like, oh, my roommate is having an emergency. I'm so sorry. Like, we do this and and it's like, all right, yeah, that's cool.
So they dumped you when they found out you
were. It was like 10 minutes into the first date was like over. I'm like, oh, okay. But
let me ask you this at this point in time. Are you conceptualizing the narrative? Like, are you on board with the narrative that you've received from the bishops or have you differentiated from this narrative that you're broken or disappointing, or that what really happened on your mission was like, how did a diagnosis and it being an actual thing, like, oh yeah, that was an actual thing, despite all that pain and suffering I went through. Are you at the point now where you're kind of feeling like, well, that was wrong. Well, that was a mess. And where are you right now?
Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay.
I will say like my real hard deconstruction didn't really start till after I returned back to West Point.
Okay. Okay.
But because at this point, again, so like, sorry, I jumped a lot of chronologically, but there is that like, I got a syndrome so far.
All right.
And and having a cursory understanding of like mental health stuff, I was like, I do know that there are conversion disorders, right? So it's like, well, they call this a syndrome, but is the syndrome the way that, you know, science is failing to describe the impact of the human soul type of, I think that was the framework I was still trying to, I was so aggressively trying to hang on to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and their version of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
So
you've met your wife.
Yeah. So I met her, and, you know, I thought she was, you know, absolutely breathtaking. But my experience was that, and the other thing too, is like I met her in Provo, right? Like for my friend's party. So I'm like, there's no way this girl who probably goes to BYU is going to talk to me. So I remember I just asked her like the stupidest question I could think of, which in my mind was like, what's your church calling? So my wife had already like begun her deconstruction of the church. She hadn't been in like over a year. So when I asked her that, she thought I was this hyper Mormon dude who was hoping to marry her a month from now. So she was like, oh yeah, I'm the ward chorister or something stupid in the YSA. But, yeah. And then I think I had a motorcycle, and so I was like, hey, I'm going back to California. You're from California. You want to come with me? She's like, no, you're a stranger. I was like, fair enough. So yeah, she wasn't interested, but, I'd say reached back out eventually and things worked out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so nothing, I'd say outside of meeting my wife, nothing really meaningful happened. I would say like me trying to be open. Well, actually I will say, so, well, like kind of texting, this girl I met at a party who very clearly wasn't that interested. Like one of the things she mentioned, she's like, oh, I'm actually like, I'm like I dated this guy who actually said like he knows a lot about like the Mormon church, and like there's actually like a lot of really messed up stuff that it's been doing, and like they lie about a lot of things. They punished his family member for just saying like honestly like some of the stuff that they're doing. That was where yeah. So I guess in a weird way, I owe John, I owe you thanks for helping my wife deconstruct before I was ready, because yeah. But yeah. And
what was that like for you?
I mean, I'll be honest, my wife is like by the time I met her, she was basically already at that kind of Zen point of like, she's just so far removed from it. Like I said, like where I sometimes like dwell on like forgetting the made up names in the Book of Mormon. Like she hasn't been burdened with that for nearly the entire time. 'Cause like her side of things, like she was very much like Mormon royalty, and it's all a lie. And I think she was pretty disenfranchised, really.
She decided from her study that she felt like it was all a lie? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just a fundamental level of like, this is bull, like this doesn't feel right. This doesn't, like I'm seeing this hurt people around me. Like I don't want to, so, and I would say like, so West Point, when we started dating, we did date for over a year, and then we're engaged for like 8 months before we could actually get married. During that time, like we very much were, I would say, like a mixed faith couple, partnership. And I really didn't start deconstructing until after like a major trauma. 'Cause there was a period of time too where like I had a lot of stuff hit really fast, but I had that narrative of you can't be mad at people. People aren't the church, and that was one of those like really thought controlling, thought stopping. It's an effective tool, right? For a high demand organization. If you just have these little, these, what's the term I'm looking for? You have these platitudes that keep people from having to really feel something or to think about it, right? To analytically look at it. It's really easy to maintain that control.
Yeah. So you head back to West Point.
Yeah,
Then.
so I head back to West Point. Again, I had failed God because no girls wanted to talk to me, and I was back at West Point. So I was gonna probably have to be a bachelor and try to just be a sad old man who had to kill people for the military. Again, that was probably where I saw myself, the cringe-inducing self-pity there, but.
During this time, is this the time that you begin deconstructing? This time when you're at West Point?
Yeah, when I came, so it's one of those things, like I came back, the summer's always really hard. Like you get the chaplains or like the senior missionary couple that they're really just able to do, like, it's one of those things where like, I don't want to call it a full trauma bond, but it really crystallizes your identity to be in the middle of a training environment. And so like, West Point itself, it's Camp Buckner. So it's really pretty, like old-timey looking like lake resort, but it's a military training camp. So there's like just like really picturesque place. So it's like you're sitting there, it's like you're learning how to shoot, move, and communicate, and you're doing stuff like the water confidence course, where it's like you're holding on to a zip line over the lake, and you have to let go, so you like know how to like hit water like at high speed without like breaking your legs. Just like like little stuff like that, just like the fun summer camp things. So you go from that to you have this reverent moment where, you sing Come Ye Saints on somebody's iPad, and you have your little portable military sacrament set, and you pass sacrament to your 4 buddies, and you haven't seen them in a month, but they're doing okay because you saw them at church. And so it's like there's this, there's that like extra layer of camaraderie and identity that gets built in with being able to be like, hey, we're Mormon, like this makes us different, like there's only 10 of us right now, but we're all together, we're all on the straight and narrow, we're all stripling warriors. So
Okay. So what I'm hearing is kind of, at least initially, you're feeling not only reinforced, but kind of like a cementing of
definitely.
Identity. So what happens from there?
I'd say the first major crack in my shell, I think really the first opportunity I gave myself permission to be honest and critical of my experiences in the church came when I, like 2 weeks into the semester, things normalize. I was asked to give a talk with like one of the guys. So Branch became a ward. Colonel is now the bishop. There was this really weird, like, I was really jarred by that because I was like, there shouldn't be ranks in church. God is not a respecter of persons. And I remember that was one of those dissonant things where it's like, God's church shouldn't be so strictly regimented. It shouldn't be so hierarchical. It shouldn't be based on who you know or what your profession is. It should be based on the Spirit and honesty. That was so that going into, I was asked by a high counselor to give a talk somewhere, so like I said, we drive like an hour and a half out to like New Paltz or Newburgh or something. And I'm supposed to go first, right? I'm the softball opener, try my hand at, my testimony voice, or trying my hand at, a bad, Sunday pulpit joke, and, say one cool thing about my mission and sit down so they could talk about tithing or whatever the message of the month is for the High Council. So I remember getting up to the pulpit. They were already running late for, for whatever reason, but I remember they were running late, and it really aggravated the guy I was with, who I thought he was a really good friend of mine. But yeah, like he was retired. He was a retired Special Forces colonel who was working as a civilian at West Point. And I remember just starting talking, and there was this kid sitting in, like, when I say kid, like there's like this 18-year-old guy sitting in the front row with like his whole family. It was one of those things that was like, it's not a big ward, but the entire front row was stacked. And he was just like crying a lot. And I felt moved by the Spirit, and I bore my testimony that, like, I was like, you know, like some to the effect of like, I came home early from my mission twice, and I got really vulnerable, and this kid looked up at me and like, just like, I felt like right now, like talking to you, John, like I just, like I had this conversation, which ended up being about 15 minutes about like, this is a gospel of hope and you're not beyond redemption. And I had like no context. I didn't know who this kid was, but I felt the Spirit. I felt compelled to tell this kid a lot of the things that I told myself, like, this is a gospel of hope. Like, one of the things that when returning to my mission, and I started looking for a lot of stuff that focused on like perfectionism, or, you know, because there's only like 4 or 5, but there were a small handful of talks that tried to give people a little bit of grace and saying, hey, you don't have to be perfect, just try. That unfortunately that didn't catch on with the mainstream, so they're just kind of obscure conference talks. But yeah, so anyway, I remember just telling this kid like, hey, essentially, hey, like, it's you know, you're loved, God loves you, it's okay. And that was it. I didn't really think anything of it. And then this guy, you know, the high counselor, the man in authority, he says, well, there's only 5 minutes left till the top of the hour. You guys didn't start on time, and the Lord needs you to understand how important punctuality is, and that his house is a house of order, and how important it is. So he's like, so I'm going to abstain from speaking to you. We will now sing the hymn, one verse, and we'll have the closing prayer to make sure we're out of here by the top of the hour. And I was like, oh, you know, weird decision, but okay. And then it ended real quick. Like I said, like one verse closing song. And then I remember the kid like walks up to me and he says, hey man, like, we don't know each other. Can I please hug you? I said, absolutely. So like, I just hugged this like stranger for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then like somebody called him over, and then his like grandma was like, he just got sent home from his mission yesterday. Like he had really bad anxiety. Like he just couldn't handle it. But she's like, he needed to hear everything you said. And, you know, they were like, we were worried about him. Like, you know, we were worried about self-harm this morning. And you know, and it's like, and he hasn't like talked to anybody or said anything like until he asked you for a hug. So it was one of those things. It was a very faith affirming moment for me. You know, it was like, I can be in a place to help somebody else. And, you know, so I was just like, don't worry about it. Like, I honestly I didn't expect to tell you guys about my mission experience, you know, like that. And that was it. They said, thank you again. Like, thank you so much. You know, they're like, I think I gave him my phone number. Like, hey, if you need anybody to talk to, like, I've been there, you're okay, you know? And then we get in the car, like I said, 1.5-hour drive back on post. And it was like weirdly quiet. You know, this guy normally like really likes a really talkative guy, and it was like, hey, is everything okay? And it was just immediate. It became a wall of being berated. You know, it was like, that was so selfish of you. I was supposed to give a talk about the importance of fast offering and how everybody needs to double their fast offerings because that's what they need to receive blessings. This came directly from the stake president, which came directly from the area authorities. So Austin, because you were so vain that you had to cry up on, because I remember I got a little choked up, you know. But he said you were so vain that you felt the need to cry in front of everybody that they won't receive the blessings of fast offering. And I'll be honest, I kind of checked out after that. But like I said, it was an hour and a half drive, and maybe 10, 15 minutes into it, I finally broke the silence and said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And for the rest of the time, it was just him telling me how selfish I was, how disappointed he was, how weak it was to see, just they see. So that was one of the things that they liked to do, like Little Dog and Pony Show, is we had to be in our uniforms for church, and then being a high council guest, I'm an hour and a half away or wherever, New Paltz, Newburgh, just upstate New York, and I'm in my West Point cadet uniform, so I have, my little ribbons for participation, my airborne badge, my golden eagle saying that I did the German Armed Forces thing, my made up cadet rank, my little, hat, so like it's very much like it's an optics thing, and that's one of the things I remember saying is like, like you were in your uniform and like, and you looked weak. It's like you made West Point look weak. And just
by being vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So and it was one of those things, like I said, like I don't remember much. I just, like I said, it was somebody who I saw as a friend until that encounter. And that was really one of the biggest ones where, but even with that, I started thinking critically, like first about that relationship, but then about his interaction with other people and just church stuff as it was going on, real time with all of this new chain of command type of stuff that was introduced to the ward. And like, I would catch myself wanting to appraise it honestly, and I could see myself in real time, like thought stopping, like, no, you can't think that. You just think that because
Can't think what?
Just anything critical, really, like
These leaders are abusive.
yeah,
Or controlling.
exactly, or they did something wrong, or like, no, like I don't think it was wrong of me to tell somebody who was in pain that Jesus loves them,
Yeah.
Because it is a dangerous thought, right? Like if you're open to being critical of one, that's how deconstruction happens, right? Like if you could admit that there is no historicity to the Book of Mormon, what else can you accept? So you better just, That's like one of the things that I think for the Book of Mormon musical, right? There's a song "Turn It Off," where I think most people connect to it on, it's about homosexual tendencies or eroticism. But I think it does a really good job at just illustrating this thought-stopping techniques of Mormonism, right? Like that's what you have to do. You just have to turn it off. Like you can't entertain that because if I'm open to the idea that this person who is supposed to be having discernment, if they could have this bad of a read, like how, where do I go next?
It also strikes me, if you think about the temple ceremony specifically, at least the way it used to be, it's like Elohim tells Jehovah, we're going to do this, Jehovah, go and tell Michael. And then Jehovah, I will go down, Elohim. And then Jehovah goes, and Michael, we've been commanded by Elohim to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Go and tell Adam and Eve in the garden, blah, blah, blah. We will go down, Jehovah. And then Michael, and then he goes down and in the garden, and Adam and Eve, I have been instructed by the Elohim and Jehovah to further the Lord of the veil, and it's just very hierarchical, right? And then it's also very authority-based and obedience-based. And so I don't think it's a stretch to say that kind of the Mormon priesthood authority hierarchy, being authority and obedience-based, could very easily parallel kind of the military mindset of authority and obedience.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. No, and it's one of those things.
And how could you not, if you're processing one, how could you not start thinking about and processing the other?
Start seeing it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think that's why, like, I had such a painful deconstruction, because it wasn't just Mormonism or Christianity. It was also like my military identity that I ultimately lost. But
and just one more parallel we've already mentioned it, but the breaking down, the shame of the military culture and the building back up physically could easily be paralleled with the shame and the spiritual, psychological breaking down of Mormonism to then build you back up, kind of killing your identity, your instincts. Like you talk about, you had instincts all along the way of things not being right or things not being good for you. You didn't even want to go on a mission necessarily, right? You weren't sure about that maybe, or I don't know. It just seems like I heard several points along the way where you had a voice inside telling you one thing, but then you would beat it down and say, no, yeah. I'm shameful, I'm bad, I'm broken, I need to just turn it off and make it right. Yeah. It seems like that reminds me of kind of boot camp and military training, just psychologically and kind of spiritually. It seems like some really good parallels there.
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely parallels. I think the only the thing I'm reluctant is one, people will try to liken the MTC to basic training or whatever. I'm like, no, it's not. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned really early on in this, the expectation for any military force is for a person to be able to kill another person. So if that's the fundamental expectation of that organization, it's not ethical, but I get why they do it. Right? Like I said, you don't want your snipers to be thinking before they shoot at somebody who's rigging a bomb, I wonder what their kids will do tomorrow. Right? We don't. I
wonder if they have a loved one back home. Yeah, you don't want.
Yeah, I wonder what loss pushed them to fight against a superpower. You don't want that humanization, right? And part of dehumanizing others is dehumanizing yourself, right? So you don't view yourself as a human who's capable of being injured, right? You don't want your soldiers to learn what moral injury is, right? You want them to be the Spartan, to be the faceless guy that it was broken, but now can find wholeness through this act. Where again, I'm not saying war is an impossible thing to argue ethically, but at least war has a purpose, I guess, versus why do Mormon boys need to be broken down? Why do Mormon girls need to be taught that they're worthless, that their only value is in sexual purity?
Or to ignore their inner voice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's I know it's a different plane of moral ethical reasoning, but it's at least the military is saying we need you to suspend your thought and your reasoning because you're going to do something really bad. But with Mormonism, where's the so what? And I think that's one of the questions I had was why does this organization have, like you said, have so many parallels? Why is it so controlling? To what end, right? How does this, which is supposed to be the immaculate representation of a loving God and, super powerful deity, how is this the structure that they decided to use?
And the answer would be to get you to the celestial kingdom, to help you become a god someday, to keep you on the straight and narrow. Well, that would be the answer.
I don't know if anyone told you, John, we don't get a planet anymore.
I mean, the church has stopped emphasizing that.
I know, yeah.
But it is, eternal families, blah, 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 celestial kingdom, worthiness, purity.
Right? Yeah, and realistically, everybody in Sunday school is still talking about how they will still become gods eventually. Yeah. So, I don't know. That's what you get when you have a bunch of PR people as the top brass,
But I guess if that's real, then maybe it's okay. But if it's just what a bunch of dudes said to kind of, because they've been fooled or because they want to incentivize you, then it's a huge waste of psychological energy and additional stress and depression potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my issue with that would be is I've got really limited experience, but I could think of 1,000 better ways for people to, I don't know, just the plan of happiness is There's, I don't know. It's like if someone who's like 5 or 6 can look at it and say like that's got holes in it. It's like, is that real? If that is the, I'm willing suspension of disbelief here. If that is the deity in this reality that we're bound to, like, man, we got the short end of a stick. Like, Mormon God is such a weak, like, to have all of eternity be interrupted or upset or confounded by a handshake. Like, that's a pretty bad plan.
Meaning if you don't learn the right handshake in the temple, you don't get to pass the gates that lead to eternal salvation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you were born in Taiwan, the island of Formosa, literally any time before like the 1800s when the Jesuits eventually ended up there. And it's like, are just most people just, I guess like family history or whatever is supposed to be the fix for that. But I don't know. It's just like, there's too many holes in that.
Wait, what were you saying about being born in Formosa before the 1800s?
Oh, just like the idea that like, again, like just simply existing can put you in a place where like you will never know about God or Jesus specifically.
While you're in this life.
Yeah.
So it's an advantage. You're born in the 1990s in Utah. Why do you get this massive advantage to learn God's one true path?
Right.
Whereas if you're born in the 1700s in Formosa, you go your whole life and you never get to hear the true path and the true messages.
Exactly.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Okay. That's what I mean about it.
Okay.
Just, I don't know. There's an absurdity to it that which is one of those things where it's like I wasn't comfortable.
Yeah.
I wasn't comfortable looking at it, even at that point in time. But again, it wasn't until like just being torn down. Somebody putting in the effort to tear me down because I had the audacity to bear a testimony. It gave me permission to see when I said things like, God's church isn't, it's not about who you know. It's not about cronyism, right? I remember like a jarring memory I have was there was a guy who was in the stake presidency when I was a kid who moved to he moved to Holiday, because he wanted to put himself in a position where he can be next to the 12 or 70, and he needed people to notice him so he can become a general authority. And I was like, that's not, 10-year-old me. I was like, no, that's not how it works.
God doesn't need that to call his chosen people.
Exactly. Yeah. God doesn't support nepotism, cronyism. That's not a Mormon thing.
Yeah.
But that would surely be an indicator of a faulty structure.
Yeah.
And just like a bunch of stuff like that, like it all just kind of cascaded really quickly where I got to a point of it was just exhausting trying to do what was supposed to be the right thing.
Yeah.
And when I reached out, it was just like this is what your leadership says, so this is how it has to be, or like it felt way more corporate than Christian.
Yeah. Really quickly, in your outline, you mentioned your home stake falling apart because of multi-level marketing scams.
Yeah.
Did that happen? Do you want to briefly just tell us what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, that's
very Mormon.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like there should be like a subcategory of Mormon Stories podcast on affinity schemes. Again, it's one of those things where you look at an organization that makes you susceptible to undue influence, you're going to be susceptible to undue influence. So, LuLaRoe came in.
We saw that documentary.
Yep. So it was really weird.
These
all
are
the
like
drone shots.
What?
I said it was weird to see like all the drone shots. I'm like, I've been there,
These are the weird leggings.
Yeah,
like the cheap,
the weird
crappy leggings.
Yeah. But they got Disney, so but yeah. So anyway, so LuLaRoe came in, and I will say, like Mormonism, like LuLaRoe isn't special to Mormonism, but Mormonism is special to MLMs. It's an easy mark. But like I remember like isogenics was a thing and stuff when I was a kid. But yeah, so LuLaRoe came through. There were a bunch of women in my ward that got the They got the Mexico special where they lost a bunch of weight, and I'm glad that they got that. But it's like I heard the horror stories of people that ended up having to move to Tennessee because like they lost everything and like they had to sell their house, and the property value of a California home was barely enough to get them a smaller place, in the South. Or in much more affordable markets. Just like the folks who run it there, like, they made a big point of utilizing Mormonism as a selling point of why they could be trusted, and had a bunch of women who, got in early enough that they became the success stories for it. And, one of the guys I knew, he was always trying to pass the bar, but then he was making so much money from LuLaRoe that he stopped trying to become a lawyer, I guess, or something like that. Like, it's just one of those things. When I say it came through the stake, like their distribution center was for a while in Corona, and they employed probably 80 to 90% of the youth that were trying to have jobs in high school.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it just, like the documentary showed, it was, a lot actually happened in Corona. A lot of happening in Mormonism in the Inland Empire.
Yeah.
So are people getting ripped off, losing life savings?
A lot.
Like
it's like they I think the term came from, what's it called? Like Amway, I think, or one of the other just dirtbag organizations. But the term is garage qualified, where people have a hard time selling their product, because remember, the product isn't the product. The product is the pyramid. So they purchase the minimum number of items they need, and they get to a point where they keep purchasing it every month and they're not selling it, and eventually they have their guest bedroom and their garage is just full of unsellable product.
Whether it's soap,
or protein shakes, candles,
special juice,
essential oils,
essential oils,
or in your case, or LuLaRoe's case,
leggings,
like really crappy, cheap, ugly leggings.
Yeah, exactly.
and they lose a ton of money that way.
Yeah.
Because they're at the bottom of the pyramid, and nobody wants that crap anymore because it's out of fashion.
Yeah,
and they've lost a ton of savings. And
yeah, man, I'd say, and it's one of those things that's hard. It's like, I don't want, I don't wish any individual, like active member of the Mormon Church ill will or like bad things to happen. But like you gotta be open to like, why are so many of us getting grifted and grifting each other? It's like driving up here. Young Living is a blight on humanity.
That's there's going to be people that defend Young Living. So, but that's your experience.
That's my experience. Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So did you lose your faith your junior year at West Point?
I'd say it was a big part of deconstruction, just opening myself up to the idea that Mormonism had a lot of shortcomings, that specifically the organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was failing to represent the entirety of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And, and honestly, like there was a brief period of time where it's like that thought, I think, could have really opened me up to a lot of like alt-right ideology. Because I don't want to advocate for violence, but like you watching something like the Under the Banner of Heaven, with like the Lafferty brothers, or pretty much every non-Brighamite sect, I think it's really good, bad publicity for the Brighamite sect, because most of what they're saying, it's like there's new scripture they come out with, but a lot of their fundamental claims come from claims that, Joseph Smith made, or they come from things that are foundational to Mormonism, So it's like, well, I don't condone the violence. It's like, you guys have this written. This was written. I get it. Like Mormonism has a history of militia activity, but how do you expect people not to take this from this when this is, like, how do you expect violence to not happen when you advocated for violence in your holy book. But yeah.
So while you're at West Point, do you find out about DesNat? Do you find out about ultra right-wing Mormon prepperism? Like, was that something you even became exposed to and flirted with?
I mean, I was always aware of it, so it might have been a good indicator for you. But like, I'd say like one of my hobby like interests is like affinity scam, multi-level marketing. But then the other thing too is like, more recently, interest has been like hate groups, or just militias in general, right? Like being military population, lacking a sense of community post-military is one of those really like critical times that people are recruited and people are vulnerable to extremism or to hard either right or left ideologies.
I remember Marty Ross in our interview with him just saying that there's no happiness that he has or will ever feel like some mission in Afghanistan or whatever, where he's with his buddies and they're on the top of a hill. And
it was a moment. He was describing a moment he had on the top of a hill with the sun. I think the sun was coming up or going down. To me, it felt like he was just very fully present in a moment
of meaning and purpose and identity.
With his group, with his community there. When in that moment they weren't threatened. They were just existing, but one with the purpose of being there.
And the idea is that if after you get to civilian life, you lose that and you can't find anything better to replace it with. Like, is that right?
Yeah. So one of the kind of, I guess, predecessors or kind of jump off points, because there really is like, and the FBI has some like really good, studies, datas around like the development of extremism. But one of the things is, so we talk about like, 3%er clubs, right? Which is inaccurate, but this idea that there was a percentage of the population that swore an oath to defend the Constitution. So you're now an oath keeper, right? So you're externalizing this identity, and that I may be a veteran, but just because I'm not getting paid by the DoD anymore, I'm still like my oath isn't over, right? So it's being able to leverage kind of those philosophical frameworks to, so on one thing, it's like, oh, like this person is just saying they want to uphold the oath they held. Right. But then the next step of that is there's a threat to the thing that you swore to defend. And then the next step of it is identifying the threat. And then it's identifying the immediacy of the threat. So, I don't think you're ever like same, with DesNat, like, I don't think you're going to run into somebody at Smith's, and being like, oh, I see you like that brand of sour cream. You should really join my militia.
Right.
Right. It's a lot more subtle. And I think DesNat specifically, like, I don't want to condone any violence they do or like intimidation or anything, but when they have something that they view as the word of God and they interpret it literally, like, I feel like that's, I don't know, I don't want to say on us, but I think I personally, I see that as like a moral imperative for the authoritative branch of the Brighamite sect to, to disavow it, to say this, to give them the current prophets, belief on blood atonement or something of that nature. But also I think they are a useful tool for a corporation that likes their money and likes their control.
Yeah. I kind of hear in that too, that if you have an identity within the military, let's just say, where you're fighting for something and your existence is about fighting and protecting something, and you're uniquely qualified to do it, right? And you're right. You're also right. Or at least superior to those that you're fighting against in some way, right? Then you're living this life where you're at war. and there's always a threat. And so when you're discharged, it's kind of like you recreate the same situation. Is that right? It's like you're fighting against something. You're uniquely qualified, and you're protecting as well. It just feels like that loss of purpose when if we're talking about this kind of discharged, that you recreate something in its place that meets a lot of the same identity criteria. So you get to keep the identity piece. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think you're really along the right track. I think that's a very fair assessment of that transition and how vulnerable you can be. I will say, not misrepresenting my full, military career timeline. Like I spent my entire time in TRADOC, right? Like I never deployed.
Yeah.
But so I can speak to the culture of that though. I had classmates who dropped out of West Point, bought a one-way ticket to Spain, and then walked all the way into Turkey and started fighting, and just started fighting against ISIS. And one of them ended up a few years later with a mystery AK-47 slug in his leg in Chicago. Like that was a classmate of mine. So 9/11 happens. The America is galvanized. There's a clearly definable threat, and people believe that there's an imminent threat. So actions are taken. You could try to argue whether or not the right action was taken, but it also gets to a point where it's hard to say what, it's like for me, like the bias I always got was we didn't know whether or not there were WMDs, but we sure as hell knew that there was an IED, that like we didn't know if somebody had nukes, but we knew that somebody was still trying to blow us up. So when you're like, you introduce like that, the concept of like the fog of war or like real, the reality of combat, there's this unfortunate, like, well, so what? Like, well, we're here now. Now what do we do? And I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan made that really difficult because it was like, what the hell was the point? It's like nobody found any WMDs. Osama bin Laden wasn't in either of these places. Like half the guys were Saudi, right? So it's like when you used to be able to say like, well, I'm looking to the guy on my right, the guy on my left, and making sure they're okay. Like that, I think is one of the big like things that you have to do to try to grapple with that. And I think that's one of the things that I feel fortunate now I never had to try to grapple. But it's one of, like, I can't imagine, it's like I had an instructor who lost his leg, and he was building a school, like a girls' school in Afghanistan. And like, nah, it's not there anymore, and then it's like, what was it all for? And I think it's really hard to see that what is all for, and to have that yearning, that void to fill, and I think like just the militias in general really offer that. And the other thing too, it's like with the divide again, that civilian military divide, like I would say it does skew more conservative, right? Because in general, if you're open to being critical of, U.S. foreign policy or capitalism or colonialism, you might not run out to sign several years of your life away, So
yeah,
there is kind of that echo chamber that I think exists. And then, again, when you're normalized to that elevated experience and then you don't have it anymore, and all of a sudden you could find it again, like that can be really appealing.
Yeah. I can see that.
So how did your military career end?
Yeah, so kind of abruptly, unsanctum. Yeah, just.
Did you graduate from West
Point? I did. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I had continued problems up until about halfway through my senior year. I did get a diagnosis that was very treatable, and just got it worked on. They approved me. While I was doing that, I actually broke my back. So I was all broken up. There was actually like a lot of talk about whether or not they'd even let me graduate.
From something in training or just?
So that's one of those things that I'll never know for sure. I think I injured it doing like a combatives class thing, but it took me months to get imaging done. And then when they did the imaging, they're like, "Oh, you have an extra vertebrae now. Like that one broke in half." So,
but it wasn't like on your mission or
no. So like, within
surfing, training.
No, it wasn't me being, it was me doing an active thing that the Army was expecting me to do. Service connected for sure. But I graduated. I was a medical holdover though, like just over the summer. They wanted to make sure that my back was healing up okay. Like I was doing like PT test to prove to them like I'm still physically capable of doing this. Because I branched a combat infantry. I was supposed to be a tanker, like an armor officer. And I was supposed to, so branched armor officer, was supposed to go to Fort Irwin, which is the National Training Center. And I was supposed to be OPFOR for, a few years, play around in the sand. And then, but because of that, that's a cavalry unit, which is light. They're not all tanks. They have smaller stuff. So because of that, I was supposed to go to Ranger School. So when I got cleared, I was waiting to get cleared to leave West Point as an officer, I was in a couple of different shops, like like S6 or S2, whatever, like just doing random odd jobs for higher ups, trying to stay out of trouble. I was on my way to a physical therapy appointment for my back, on post, and I crashed my motorcycle going about 10 miles an hour, maybe 15 tops. I was in first gear. I caught my handlebar perfectly to my stomach and it blew up my spleen. So I self-admitted to the hospital on post. I didn't know I had ruptured my spleen or anything. I was just worried because I was like 5 minutes late for my physical therapy appointment. And, free healthcare. So they're like, "Oh, well, what hurts? If you fell off a motorcycle, like, let's just take a look at you." And kind of, my glove came off in a little slide. I think I might have broken a rib, other than that, wearing a helmet, all the gear all the time, wasn't too worried. And then so they did a CT scan first and then waiting for them to scan my hand to see if I broke it. And they're like, "Hey, it doesn't matter. You've got a lot of internal bleeding. It's the end of the month. The surgery staff isn't here, so it'll take longer for them to get here across post than it would be to just life flight you to the closest civilian hospital. You need emergency surgery. You're dying if we don't stop the bleeding." So I was like, "Oh, okay." So by this point in time, I graduated. I was married. I had like a few weeks of leave, and then I had to go. My wife was finishing up her degree at the University of Utah. So I had to call up my wife like less than a month and be like, "Hey, like crashed, but I'm okay. But also I'm about to get emergency surgery." So that was a pretty terrible thing. And she was doing a internship with, I think, KSL, she was doing her undergrad was in strategic communications. So she was working with TV folks, and she had her phone off because she was actually like doing like camera work that day. So I remember just like calling her a bunch, like trying to let her know like, "Hey, like about to get on a life flight." So I had the life flight. It was only about 20 minutes long. Just kind of faded in and out at one point. Woke up with one of the flight nurses like mounted on me, and she's like, "Oh, hey, you've been dead for 3 minutes. Like, welcome back." So that happened, and that was the first one. No near-death experience, no nothing. Just I don't know.
Waking up.
Yeah. Just woke up with a sore chest. Like, what's going on? Like, "Oh, you were dead for a few minutes, but you're fine now." And then I don't know, a couple of weeks after that, I survived. I got emergency surgery. Have a scar like full length of my front side. They put me on emergency leave because there wasn't anything I was going to do with a 1.5 foot long stitches up my stomach, and I ended up feeling really sick. Actually here, like they let me spend a couple weeks with my wife here while I was in Utah. One day I was feeling really sick, so we go to go to the ER just to make sure everything's okay. Cause like I just gotten the staples removed the day before. I got put into a CT scanner, and I remember, if you've ever been in a CT scanner, like they give you a contrast eye. And normally you get like this really weird metallic taste in your mouth, and then you feel a little warm, and then it's done. So I remember like I'd gotten a CT like 2 weeks before. It goes, I'm sitting there waiting. It's only like 30 seconds, but it got really hot, and then I felt it like burning. And I remember just thinking like don't be weak, like in 5 more seconds. And then I woke up like 3 days later. I ended up having a full anaphylactic reaction to the CT contrast. So I had, so they put me in a medically induced coma. And that was the second time in like 2 weeks where I had social workers asking my wife if she knew if I had a will or any of all that stuff. Luckily I did, because, military, they keep you on top of that. But
what a time.
But yeah, and so I will say, like, all that major trauma, like all of that stuff I dragged my poor wife through. I don't know. There was no comfort. There was no, there was no visitation. There was no simple, small voice. It was just emptiness. And that was like really like terrifying, cause like I knew, like that little trademark phrase. I knew the church was true. Like I knew that there was a plan for everybody. I knew that there were things I was called to do, and just, I don't know, like it just wasn't there anymore. I remember that was the first time I ever told my dad, like even like that's the thing, my senior year, I basically just stopped going to church. Like I'd still check in with the senior missionary couple because they were super sweet and super supportive. But, like the bishop weirdly was like, well, can you pass the sacrament? I'm like, no, can't do that. No. And then he's like, okay, well, be safe then. And that was it. And I was like, okay, well, weird conversation for a 25-year-old to have with with the grown man, but okay. But yeah, it was just.
He was asking if you had sex?
Yeah, with my wife or my fiance, and
before you'd been married. Okay.
So, but honestly, like that too, like that was a huge thing that, like, again, my wife had really deconstructed, but my wife was really concerned to have physical intimacy with me because there was a legitimate concern that I would blame her for something. Like I would feel remorse
that she tempted you or caused you to transgress.
Yeah. And that's so sad, like,
courtship can be such a beautiful time.
Right. But yeah. But I feel like we navigated that, like I said, we got engaged, it wasn't 2 weeks long, and so, but anyway, like the first time I like told my dad or like anybody, like, I don't want a blessing. Like I don't, like, please no, was when I was in the hospital. Yeah. And then,
so you didn't want a blessing because why?
For the first time in my life, it really felt pointless.
And this is a healing blessing to heal you of your sickness. You're just like, in my experience, God's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then like, it was really quick with that, but I think it wasn't a healthy deconstruction in the first part. Because simultaneous to that, like I was trying to keep my military career going. I healed up enough where like I got approval. I actually went down to Georgia, starting armor, basic officer leadership course. Because of that unit I knew I was supposed to go to, I got earmarked to have to go to Ranger school. I had to do a Ranger PT test. I did the PT test and there's like a 5-mile ruck run, I think. I re-injured my back and it sucked. But by this point I'd been through it enough to know, like, just got to document this, got to take care of it. I might have to recycle. That's annoying, but I'm here. Cause the thing is I had a whole year after graduating West Point before I even left, like to go to basic officer leadership course. So I had like this really weird, like, year of like staff officer experience. But yeah, I go, and then there's this random, I don't know what it is with colonels, but they don't like me. But this random colonel is, like, oh, hey, you don't have a spleen. I'm like, no, it's been over a year. He's like, oh, well, that makes you non-deployable, so you need to get out of my army. So like, just completely out of nowhere, I just was told that I was going to be med boarded. So then that process again took like almost a year. So, just spent a lot of time like waiting, trying to find a purpose or identity, and similar to being open to being critical of, the church, kind of started being open to being critical of the military. Like one of them was like, there's a program called DoD Skill Bridge. It's for soldiers who are like getting out to have like a job lined up where they do an internship while they're still active duty, and that way they have something to go to. And I had like done all the paperwork, and I was trying to do a DoD Skill Bridge like internship with the FBI field office in Atlanta. And the captain of the TRADOC unit was just like, no, I don't want to reward you for quitting on the Army. So instead of like, getting a skill set, doing this thing that could have been like a complete career transition, I was like sitting out at like 4 times a week, 24-hour guard duty to like sign people in who were coming to officer basic. And
it's reminiscent a little bit to me of your mission experience.
Yeah.
But also they told you couldn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't you quitting. You were blindsided by that, by the way.
Yeah, for sure.
You were like, I would serve with no spleen.
Yeah.
Not a problem for me. It was a problem for you all. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
So how did it end?
Interesting.
Just really unceremoniously. I December of 2019, it was December 23rd, and I was able to get my orders cut, and I had like a couple months of leave time accrued. So there was like, technically my end of term date wasn't until like the end of January or middle of February 2020. And I was hopeful that I would find something to do, in America and in February of 2020. So my wife and I, we moved back here. I got a job working a security company, and that was one of those things that was really difficult for me to navigate because, I don't know, from like a ethical standpoint, like I remember I had to work on the Young Living building, and I was just like the entire time I was like, these are known, just MLMs in general are bad. And
you feel like they're grifters?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And also there's like this really weird, like shrine to D. Gary Young. In the headquarters.
So you were speaking, having worked on premises.
Yeah.
And you were speaking of Young Living.
Yeah.
Okay.
I read all their propaganda talking about how great he was too. And yeah.
Is this where you worked the security so this is all part of that experience where, wasn't it for the church you ended up?
Yeah. So another thing that really again, at the time alarmed me, but it's just like, I don't know what to expect in the same way that I don't know how I could expect anything different from like Desnat folk. How subversively violent the official church is. And I say that very directly in that there is here in the valley, in what is very deliberately designed to look like a Deseret Industries warehouse, a security training center that has multiple shoot houses, 150-yard indoor ranges, $40,000, gun safes with all, like the actual machine guns, not just, not semi-auto, but like full auto, short barrel rifle, suppressor stuff that they use for training for their executive defense. I guess they think that the Quorum, Q15. It's like one big Jason Bourne movie where they need to get into shootouts every general conference or something, but they had a full 1-to-1 scale of the standard stake center pulpit, where they had lines so they could teach I'm guessing their new agents. They were very proud of their
what to do if a terrorist or
active shooter,
assailant
crazy
shooter
ex-Mormon,
comes in
podcast
a stake
host,
center,
whatever.
What? Hey, wait. But if a shooter breaks into a stake meeting while a general authority is there,
well, the high value person's there. Yeah.
training to take out the shooter.
So it would be training security detail.
Yeah.
basically.
So executive security training, but and just the level of it too. They were. The guy I initially spoke to was very dismissive until I mentioned that I went to West Point, and then he opened right up. He just told me, I was like, so what is it you guys are doing here? And he said, that's above your pay grade. And then I was like, well, I recognize this stuff. I'm familiar with it. Like one of the things I did, I actually one of my smaller side jobs while I was an officer at West Point was I got to be a range safety officer. So we actually had the FBI hostage rescue team and Secret Service come up and use some of the shoot houses on West Point. So I got to see, some of the cool guys stuff, the secret squirrel type of things. So I'm familiar with a lot of stuff, and this is really weird for a church to have. And again, he was like I said, once I mentioned I was a West Point grad, he was like, oh, well, that's different. He's like, you should actually look at applying. We use the exact same application process as Secret Service. He was very proud that they had a 1-to-1 copy of the Secret Service interview, but then they also added a 15 plus year history of interviewing all of your former priesthood leaders. So they would go back, so and that was just one of those just weird, it's one of those things that's I can't understand, if I look at it as the C-suite of a corporation that has, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets and net worth, I understand that, it's not a surprise that, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk have highly trained security details. But they're not trying to pretend that they're God's one true church. I don't know. It's if there was discernment,
Oh, you're saying if these
God would stop a bullet.
If the church, if God's all powerful,
Yeah. Right.
or if the church leaders had a direct line of communication with God, they could pretty much always make decisions in a way where they would never be under significant threat.
Yeah, they'd see around those corners. You know, I mean, I say this tongue in cheek, but if God protected Donald Trump, surely any of the brethren here are untouchable, right? Right?
Okay. So that left a bad taste in your mouth for the church?
Yeah. And that's where I really started seeing it more as an organization, more as just a tax shelter.
Corporation.
A
business?
A business, yeah. So.
Okay. So, I was just going to say that's significant. That's more than a lot of our viewers or listeners or former interviewees have experienced, because you not only had to deal with the death of your faith, you had to deal with the death of your kind of military/patriotism, which is its own form of religion, and then also your identity and your career, both religiously but also professionally. That's a lot of deaths. In addition to all the medical trauma,
actual death
you had
that you experienced
over multiple years.
Yeah.
Like you kind of, it's almost like you're a veteran of war, but of psychological war and disillusionment, identity disillusionment. So that's on the one hand, a lot of tragic disappointment and disillusion. But on the other hand, you escaped deployment where you could have been literally blown up and or had to kill people that could have potentially led to moral injury, that I think is a topic you care about. So talk about maybe all of that, like trying to make sense of all that, whether you're happy or sad or broken or healed.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it weirdly came up in the Paul brothers. Like one of the things they mentioned, right? Like,
because they're like, "Hoorah, we're going to be deployed!" We're excited.
But it was, and it came out bad. And I know the moment they said it, they realized it sounded weird. But then I think they were afraid to say like, "No, that's wrong." So they kind of like doubled down weirdly on it. Like they wish there was a school shooter so they can essentially like be the hero. And that's a weird thing to say. And I'm sorry, like I'm paraphrasing, but in my memory, like that's how it came across. And I was like, what? One of the ways you lower the threshold of violence is, underselling it, right, is you view deployment as being on the away team, right? So your sport is violence, is combat. If you're training the entire time, you're just sitting on the bench. Nobody wants to spend their entire high school, collegiate, professional career being a bench warmer, right? You want to go into the paint. You want people to see your athleticism, your capability, your expertise, your mastery of your craft.
Put me in, coach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that type of thing is really what they were kind of alluding to, was that they wish one of the worst examples possible, but like they wish for an opportunity where they can
Showcase.
show courage, show competence, right? Because otherwise, like, what is it for, right? It's like I had to memorize the effective kill range of an M67 grenade and the M203 grenade launcher, the like however many times I shot expert with an M4. I mean, absolutely nothing when I'm trying to apply to colleges, or when I'm, even like playing Call of Duty with the friends on a weekend, like it's just, you commit so much of yourself to this thing and then it goes away and then you just have to try to make sense of it. Like that's the thing, is like more and more I saw, it was really interesting that, like my generation, from a military standpoint, like we've only ever known war. Like we have not known a peacetime military.
Oh, because the Iraq War started in 2000, whatever.
Exactly.
9/11 happens in 2001.
Yeah.
And we've been either in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah, nonstop.
For 24 years
exactly.
since then. Okay.
So, but I remember like 2014, 2015, 2016, like people were concerned that they wouldn't get a chance to prove, that they wouldn't earn their red badge of courage. And in that regard, like I know, like I'll say, like I didn't deploy. I didn't get that. I didn't get that sunrise.
That Marty Ross talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, like now I reconcile it with just saying, like, I've got buddies that graduated 2018. They're captains. They still haven't deployed. So it is changing.
But do you feel like you metaphorically dodged a bullet, or do you wish you could have deployed?
Honestly, there's so much of me that still feels like I had an obligation.
With all the training and the investment.
Well, not just that, but like I felt a moral responsibility. Like, and I know it might sound weird because I know I talked about like trying to disentangle myself from this framework that like I had an obligation to kill people, or like I was broken, so that made me capable of doing this thing. And I see the cognitive distortion associated with that, but I'd be lying if I had the opportunity to prevent someone else from having to do it. Like, I still think that, like, I guess I think I feel I would be okay. And I just want everybody else to be okay. So if somebody has to go, why not me? Yeah.
So you're not like, dang, man, now that I'm questioning patriotism, now that I'm questioning American exceptionalism, now that I'm questioning the church as the, Mormon church as the doctrinal and spiritual justification for war.
And even the military structure and
Authority and the chain of command. And
yes, it's self-interest in, having you understand yourself in a certain way. It sounds like there's still part of you that lives inside you.
that conditioning is still
you
there,
connect to.
running deep. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a part of it too, that like, I think it's exasperated by that civilian military divide is like, so I'm going to say a weird hypothetical out loud. But like on the one hand, I understand like any, like was it the Logan brothers, right? Like especially
Paul brothers?
sorry. The Paul brothers. Especially if they deploy, like I'm sure if they saw this, they'd be like, man, what does he know? Trade doc, never deployed, right? Like there's
What's that term? Trade doc?
Yeah, trading doctrine command. It's the schools.
Okay.
Yeah. Like there's always going to be a degree of gatekeeping. It's like you talk about like, if the military is a spear, all of support and logistics and everything are the shaft of the spear. And then people that are doing indirect stuff is going to be the head of the spear, but the tip of the spear, the part that actually cuts, that's your special forces or whatever. But, so there's always going to be people that are creating that extra in-group or out-group. But I'd say from like a civilian standpoint, like nobody gets a lot of that. Like people don't understand, like the nuance or the differentiation. So I'd say the first part would be like, even though like I am out and I am questioning and I am like potentially critical of like the ethical frameworks, like I still have brothers and sisters that are out there that will be put in harm's way. Have potentially been put in harm's way by people who voted for somebody who doesn't have their best interests in mind. So it's not a matter of whether or not what they did is right and wrong, is they're going to come home, hopefully, and they're going to be in some form of, either perfect condition or some degree of broken. And it's like, I feel connected in that way that I still need to like maintain my own ability to like help that community. It's like veterans, like if a veteran isn't looking out for a veteran, like that they're on their own. And it's unfortunate that like because there's such a disconnect between the military and the civilian sector, it's like even if I disagree with everything everybody did, unless it's like outright war crime, like I'm gonna do what I can to support them, to connect with them, ask them about their favorite. And it's like one of those things that's like, especially having never deployed and having friends that have been in the Army 8-10 years now, still never deployed. When people say thank you for your service, it's like, they mean well generally, but it can be really uncomfortable because it's like, well, I haven't deployed. So like, what have I served? Have I done anything? I haven't been in harm's way. And like, that's something I'm cognizant of for myself, that always kind of that slight discomfort of thank you for your service. But I would say if you like want to connect with, members of the military, like ask them, like what was your favorite moment? Like what was your sunrise? Like what's something stupid you did in basic training? Because like everybody gets overwhelmed in basic training and they do something just completely moronic and it's or like what was your favorite nickname for one of your friends, right? Like show like interest in the human like experience that they had, because it can be really lonely,
Yeah.
And I think that's why I hold on to that part of my identity, is because I think if I let that go, that there's going to be a whole population that gets abandoned.
Yeah. I appreciate you taking the time to explain, how do you put it, the civilian gap, the civilian
just like
and the
civilian military divide or gap.
that divide or the a bit, because I do think there's a reality difference there that is it's very real. It's tangible. And I think it can be part of the reason why we don't hear more from veterans. We don't hear more is because it's so arduous to try to explain things in a way when you've experienced, I think, a part of life, of the world, of humanity, that the average person may not, in America, I'll say, not in the world, but in America, may not necessarily know. So I really appreciate you, really taking the time to do that. I really appreciated it with Marty as well, taking the time to explain things that I think can be really, really difficult actually to explain,
Yeah.
in an attempt to acknowledge and close the gap a little bit. Yeah.
So really, really quickly, like again, I listened to a New York Times report this morning on the confirmation hearing of the current nominated Secretary of Defense, and one of the and I don't have his name top of head. I don't know if you
Hedgebeth
do.
or something like that.
What's that?
It's H name, right? Like Hedgebeth or.
So I could Google it, but I don't want to get political, so I'm even hesitant to want to mention his name because we want people of all political persuasions and none to feel safe and welcome here. And so this isn't me getting political, but it's just me describing what I'm picking up from the news, and that's that this guy isn't a traditional nominee because he's never really managed any organizations over like 100 people, and that was like a nonprofit. But he has served in the military, boots on the ground kind of stuff. But I think one of the big things about him was he has some Christian nationalist tattoo and some cross or something that's also militaristic, and there's this younger generation of young men in the United States that are kind of turning more to the Republican Party, and Christian nationalism seems to be kind of on a resurgence. And I don't know if that's more or less prevalent here in Utah within Mormonism, or if that's just kind of countrywide. But you mentioned Christian nationalism as a major theme. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to share whatever thoughts or feelings you have about that, just in terms of your own personal point of view of where Mormonism is going, where Utah culture is going, where the church is going, the directions, but also where the country's going. Again, not to endorse any particular position. We haven't talked about this beforehand, but because you identified it, we want to give you a chance to share what your observations are around that. Yeah.
So I'd say the context of the mentioning, Christian nationalism is really about the trend, towards that. I think, again, Mormonism in itself outside of Utah, it's such a small thing in the scope of the world. So we have, in the form of DesNat, like a very succinct nationalist religiously motivated nationalist movement that I think is a really good case study for not only the like the march towards extremism, or to the creation of militias based around these ideologies. It's hard for me to not, trying to respect that primer you gave. I don't see Christian nationalism as a right versus left issue. I see it as like a fundamental danger to a free republic. for those unaware, that, just the concept of Christian nationalism, or now we're looking at Christian dominionism, just this idea that, I'd say fundamentally that America should be a Christian nation, and that its government structures and laws should align with, broadly speaking, evangelical Christian morality and belief and control. The current political landscape we're heading into is an opportunity for us to reevaluate, I hope. So again, it's one of those things, if you're not aware of Project 2025, it is a very succinctly written piece of government wish list, if you will, that was largely put up by a body that supports Christian national ideology. I guess specifically for, I'd say the specifically active Mormon sub part of this culture, or audience, I guess, would be to be analytical, and not take for granted that, or I guess to avoid the belief that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think there's a lot of stuff we could see in the news and behind the scenes that there's consolidations of power and a desire to impact, people's freedoms, or to change the law in a way that it biases towards one sect of religion.
I couldn't help but notice the two sort of terrorist attacks that happened over New Year's. One was the gentleman that drove his car into a crowd in New Orleans, and the other was the man who parked his Tesla truck, I think, or one he rented in front of a Trump Towers, and it exploded it, and he died. Both were military people. Mm-hmm. That could be just a coincidence. We certainly don't want to give the impression that military people are dangerous. But did that shock you? Did that disturb you? Did you have thoughts about that at all? Or is that just a total coincidence and
I would say in general it's a coincidence. It's not like there's any sections of the military that are secretly training to lock people up or mow them down or anything, dystopian like that. Everybody I ever knew in the military was really just, they believed in America. They loved America. But beyond that, I think it really highlights one of the other, not just that divide isn't just in those who serve, but also in the mental health support that I think exists. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit outdated, but one of the common figures you would get was that every 22 seconds, a veteran successfully completes suicide. I think there's probably some subsections of the LGBTQ plus community are the only ones that come within, a stone's throw of that level of
risk.
Yeah.
And completion.
That's right. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were successful in the degree that I think they hoped they were, and it's a tragedy, but not. Beyond, I think just the important reminder to, again, connect with our military members, I think should be the takeaway there.
Better mental health support services for military.
Yeah.
Active duty and veterans.
Oh yeah, active duty and veterans. Well, yeah. Active duty is hard because it'll kill your career, or it can severely limit your career opportunity if you
seek mental health support. Yeah. It's viewed as a black mark, kind of, right?
It's one of those things, like any of the schools that look good, that make you eligible for promotion or set you apart from your peers. You can't do those with a lot of them with that. So
Yeah, that's right.
So maybe to end, when we talk about you rebuilding after all these losses, you mentioned confronting nihilism and then kind of overcoming nihilism, which is a sense of meaninglessness. I don't think any of us can really imagine what you've been through, how disappointed you might feel, all the trauma, military, religious, medical, authoritarian, all that. I can imagine you have had some dark days trying to heal from, make sense of, and then rebuild from what you've experienced and the disappointments, both of your mission and of your, your
Military service.
Training and service. Any final words you want to say about rebuilding?
Yeah.
And overcoming nihilism.
Yeah. So honestly, I think like nihilism now gets a bad rap, and it's one of those things like I'll talk about with my wife. Like there was a period of time where, if I were to say like everything is stupid and nothing matters, like I believed that, but it was also accompanied with that sadness, the emptiness, the void of nihilism that I think a lot of us who deconstruct end up finding ourselves in. And I found that, personally, one of the biggest shifts I had was I had this faith framework, but I didn't lose my biases. So I found that when I was looking at the emptiness of existence, I was looking at it through the lens of there needs to be a loving God who has made this all for me. And like that, obviously, like how depressing, how hard it is. But just giving myself permission to see the opportunity in it. So it's still saying like, hey, everything is stupid and nothing matters. But I think contextualizing in a different way was really meaningful. And I think like that's, I'd say, much less concise version of how like people view sunny nihilism. Right, like this concept is that I don't have to force myself to believe in something, but the belief that things have to be sad because there's nothing is still a belief that I'm choosing to hold on to. So I think once I gave myself permission to be free of that, I was able to I've been able to look at things and say like, hey, like this might be the only life I have. So I want to, I want to live. I want to continue existing. I'm not doing it because I'm expected to, because a God will punish me if I don't. I want to be a present husband and father. I want to keep learning things because I'm fascinated by the world. I'm fascinated by all of the structures that we've built for ourselves. I want to keep getting an education, and I want to put myself in a position where I could, work with veterans or, work with people who are trying to recover from high demand organizations. And just interest or wanting can be enough. It doesn't have to be preordained. It doesn't have to be written in the stars. It doesn't have to be on purpose for me to appreciate it or to enjoy it.
So instead of having your meaning and purpose handed to you by Joseph Smith or Mormon scripture, the Book of Mormon, or Doctrine and Covenants, or some vision of patriotism or military or national duty, or even some divine being, it's okay for you. It's actually healthy for you to just be able to just say, this is what my meaning and purpose is. And it's not external. It's coming from me. And that's actually fantastic. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, I think it's a fair summarization.
And do you have that now? What is that for you now?
I mean, it varies day by day, right? I think a constant is just my wife, being able to love her with reckless abandon. We're having a kid soon, first one. So
Congrats.
thanks. Yeah, so just like, so I think part of that is like being able to make decisions knowing that there's future generations I care about, that I want to see humanity succeed. And I conduct myself, or try to consistently conduct myself in a way that is congruent with that desire for humanity to succeed, and for people to generally be free of suffering or pain or strife.
Yeah. Beautiful. Any final questions, Margie?
I don't think so. I think this was really, really amazing. I appreciate you.
Any, Austin, any final things you wanted to share about your story, just to make sure?
Or did you want to mention a book, or had you pulled up a book you wanted to mention, or did you find that?
I feel, understandably, just looking at my story more, if you're interested in the very specific history of Mormonism and its interaction with militia building and military service, there was a book recently published by Sherman Fleek in association with a BYU professor of history. Again, one of the things we didn't touch on, I don't think it worked out, but he has been a military scholar. Very deliberate. He is full faith believing member, but he is also, as I understand, a very well regarded historian, and just gives a very open and clear view at Mormonism and their relation from, I think, 1838 until the 1990s, I think is what the book covers.
So check that book out. I know Julie's taken a note of that, and she'll include it in the show notes. But, okay. Well, it's always a very vulnerable and courageous act to come on Mormon Stories in this culture and to tell your story. But yours strikes me as particularly both powerful, but also vulnerable and special and important. And so thanks for being willing to talk to us about some really hard stuff and to help us see another point of view. It's a very different, it's almost in some ways an inverse of Marty Ross's story, but there's a huge wide spectrum of military service.
That's right.
And yours is very valid, and it's going to reach the people it's going to reach. And I think it's really important that we provide a few different perspectives. Yeah. So I can't thank you enough, Austin Wheeler, for coming on Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
And now I got to drive back to California?
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe we can feed you first.
All right. Well, so thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
All right. And Margie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Thanks to Brooklyn and Julia and everyone on the Mormon Stories team, Gerardo, that make all this possible. Thanks to our donors who are the reason why we're able to do this. If you're a monthly donor, thank you. And of course, if you value this type of content and you want to see it continue, you can always go to mormonstories.org and become a monthly donor. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and on TikTok and Facebook. That's how we keep relevant and recommended by the algorithms. And want to remind all of you that if you feel like you have a Mormon story that people could benefit from hearing, you can go to mormonstories.org, apply to be on the show, and we'll check out your application. And we can't accept all applications, but we're always looking for new stories and ways to reach people and to share the diverse experiences that are the Mormon experiences. So check us out. Thanks. We always appreciate your feedback at mormonstories@gmail.com, but mostly just as comments on these episodes, whether you're watching a short or a long form video on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever. We love your feedback and we read every comment. And so please don't hesitate to share with us any feedback or thoughts you have. So thanks again. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.